Chapter 1107. Relax. As a hunter who had shadow cloak, Danet's hiding and monitoring abilities were always pretty good. Back then, he had even helped Gehrman Sparrow lay an ambush for Steel Mavati. At this moment, he didn't show any traces of himself, but he felt a little bored. He was eager for Anderson to switch with him as soon as possible. When will such a life end? Vice Admiral Ailment, hurry up and appear. No, not now. It's better to wait until Anderson arrives. Danetz did some introspection and rationally ended his prayer. He was worried that a pirate admiral at Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy would discover that he was hiding in the dark, and he lacked the courage and confidence to deal with her. Of course, if he wore the boxing glove, everything wouldn't be a problem. As long as he made the decision fast enough, fear and apprehension wouldn't be able to catch up to him. You seem very troubled? Suddenly, a voice rang beside Danetz's ear. Danetz jumped out of the shadows in shock as an orange flame quickly formed in his hand. At the same time, he cast his gaze to the source of the voice. He saw Anderson hiding in the woods. There were green vines stuck to his head that seemed to meld him with the environment. Dog's hit. It was unknown if Danetz was cursing Anderson or himself. After venting his anger, he asked, "When did you come?" 2 minutes ago, Anderson replied with a smile. You hid well. I didn't manage to find you immediately, so I followed your hiding habits and casually asked you a question. Danetz was momentarily unsure if he should be proud or angry. He asked with mixed feelings, "If I had remained calm just now, would you have failed to discover me?" In theory, Anderson said with a smile, completely unfazed. But as an experienced hunter, there can't be only one way. Just as Danetz was about to ask what other solutions there were, he suddenly saw Bartz extinguish the candle and prepare to sleep. Minutes later, the figure of intelligence peddler, Bartz, appeared by the window in the darkness. With a nimble leap, he landed into the shadows outside the house. That was where Danetz had been hiding. Having re-entered the shadows, he was almost stepped on by his target. Bartz walked towards the sea under the cover of the shadows. Dog's hit. Only then did Danetz appear, giving Bartz the middle finger. Anderson also left the woods. As he pulled out the branches from his head, he smiled at Danetz. I think we'll hit the jackpot tonight. Danetz glanced at the strongest hunter in the fog sea and nodded vigorously. I hope it's Vice Admiral Ailment. He used the shadows that were everywhere at night and immediately took the lead in following the intelligence peddler, along with Anderson. They maintained a perfectly adequate distance. Not too stupid, Anderson observed for a moment before chuckling. Danetz scoffed inwardly but didn't respond. He knew very well that this wasn't an occasion where they could afford to mock and provoke each other. 15 minutes later, Bartz arrived at the beach and stood there, staring at the dark blue sea under the crimson moonlight. He didn't wait too long. In the darkness of the sea, a huge outline appeared, gradually forming a black ship with a white flag fluttering in the air. On the flag, 2 ghostly blue flames burned within a pitch-black skull. The Black Death. Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's flagship, Black Death. Danetz instantly became excited. If not for his shadow form, his pupils definitely would have dilated in a bid to draw in more light to see every detail of the ship. He subconsciously moved a distance forward, hoping to confirm if Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy was on the ship. As the gigantic sailboat approached, the 2 people in the shadows could see sailors busy on the deck. Is there a dock for docking here? Or will they just give Bartz a dinghy and get him to row himself over? Just as these thoughts flashed through Danetz's mind, he heard Anderson say with a suppressed voice, "Leave." Danetz's greatest strength was that he was good at following the instructions of an authoritative figure. Be it in front of Edwina Edwards or Gehrman Sparrow, he would follow the instructions to a T, apart from grumbling at most. At that moment, although his face was filled with puzzlement, with the intention to retort and persist in his own plans, he still used the shadows to silently leave the beach. When they could no longer see the Black Death and could only hear the vague crashing of the waves, did Danetz leave the shadows and appear in the forest. He hurriedly asked, "Aren't we going to confirm if Vice Admiral Ailment is aboard?" Anderson sized up Danetz and chuckled. Never underestimate a beyonder who's very famous at sea but has lived to this day. Every pirate admiral is a target you must be careful against. You must never be careless. Danetz subconsciously replied, "Admiral of Blood Seigneur, Admiral Hell Ludwell." They were all pirates who were easily killed by a particular crazy adventurer. Anderson was momentarily at a loss for words to rebut Danetz with. After a few seconds he said, "So, Isn't Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy worth paying more attention to considering how she survived Gehrman Sparrow's attack? Happy face after careful thought, Danitz inexplicably felt that Anderson's words made sense. Just as he was about to speak, his throat suddenly felt itchy as he coughed. After coughing a few times, his throat began to swell in pain, and he could taste metal. Look, I told you to be careful. Anderson clenched his fists and held them to his mouth. He coughed lightly, but it wasn't as serious as Danitz. Tracy must have spread all kinds of ailments around the ship. Once anyone approaches it, they'll quickly be infected with it and be exposed. With this wide of a range, it means that she has completely digested the Sequence 5 potion and has a chance of advancing to Sequence 4. Why couldn't it be that she has already advanced to Sequence 4? As he was far from the source of the infection, Danitz quickly recovered and instinctively retorted. If that were the case, you are either on the Black Death, or you have a victim of the Black Death disease and are on your deathbed. Anderson half-turned his body and cast his gaze towards the obstructed beach. Tracy must have used some sort of trick. It's unlikely for her to only be able to maintain the target area of the ailments to be at the front, and not the other 3 directions. Instead, she used the wind to spread the ailments to affect the people on the shore. With that said, Anderson clapped his hands and smiled again. Isn't our encounter proof that Vice Admiral Ailment is on the ship? You can inform Gehrman Sparrow. Danitz didn't hesitate any further. He immediately set up a ritual and summoned the messenger. Using the excuse of guarding the area to prevent any accidents, Anderson walked out of the forest. It was 3 a.m. in Backlund's East Burrow. Apart from the moonlight and starlight, it was pitch black. Wearing cotton pajamas and a sleeping cap with a protective hairnet, Klein sat on the bed and received the letter from Rionette Tynker without asking anything. Opening the letter, he calmly got out of bed, took out a pen from his pocket, and wrote on the back of the letter, "Return to the port city and await further instructions." After watching Miss Messenger leave, he calmly changed into his shirt, put on his vest, tied his bow tie, and put on his black trench coat. Then, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. Using the Topaz Spirit Pendulum to divine the danger level of this operation, he received almost no revelations. Without any hesitation, he returned to the real world and stood in front of the mirror. He picked up his half-top hat and wore it above his head. On the bunk bed in the room outside, Konas and Anuni opened their eyes. In an empty room on the Black Death, a figure quickly outlined itself. He had black hair and brown eyes with cold and hard facial features. He was none other than Gehrman Sparrow. Under the dim crimson moonlight, Klein swept his gaze and casually found a chair to sit down as he admired the sea vista outside. In the captain's cabin 1 level away, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, who was dressed in a white blouse and beige pants, watched Bartz leave the room in disgust. She pulled at her collar out of reflex, and her expression turned livid. She had just learned that Blazing Danitz and the strongest hunter Anderson had been staying in Theros Island recently with unknown motives. They're all related to Gehrman Sparrow. Is that fellow looking for me? Tracy narrowed her eyes as she walked towards the window without any hesitation. She was prepared to instruct the sailors on the deck to steer the ship away from these waters. At this moment, her thoughts suddenly turned sluggish. It was as if she had sunken into a state where she knew she was in a dream but was unable to extricate from it no matter how hard she struggled. Not good. Black flames abruptly emerged from the surface of Tracy's body, attempting to burn away any external influences. However, while the flames were initially able to flow smoothly, they later began to turn intermittent as they kept falling to the ground like withered petals. A strong sense of despair surged within Tracy as her thoughts turned increasingly slower. Desperate, she quickly condensed a layer of crystalline ice around her body, retracting the invisible threads towards her and wrapped herself in layers. At that moment, the door to the captain's cabin creaked open. Wearing a silk top hat and black trench coat, Gehrman Sparrow walked in. Then he politely closed the door. With a light cracking sound, the entire captain's cabin instantly became extremely quiet. The sound of crashing waves was no longer present, as though they had been separated from the real world. As for the invisible spiderwebs that entangled Tracy, they seemed to misunderstand the order that was given as they tightly bound Vice Admiral Ailment up, preventing her from moving or using her beyond her powers. Distortion. As her thoughts returned to normal, her brain no longer felt frozen. What do you want to do? She couldn't hide her fear as she watched Gehrman Sparrow slowly approach. What she couldn't understand was why the other party would give up on the attempt to make a marionette, even though she had clearly lost her ability to resist. The reason why Klein did so was because he was worried that Vice Admiral Ailment and the Demoness of White were related by blood. This way, Tracy's death would cause the demigod who was good at hexes to sense something and take measures ahead of time. Tap, tap, tap. Klein stopped in front of the Demoness. Chapter 1108 Messed Up Family. Gehrman Sparrow's silence made Tracy's heart sink, as though she had fallen into an ice cavern. When he saw despair surface on Vice Admiral Ailment's face, Klein took out a piece of paper from his pocket. With a flick of his wrist, he made it fly forward like a poker card. With a whoosh, the slip of paper cut through a tiny portion of the invisible spider webs like a piece of metal. It tore open the translucent ice crystal and lacerated Tracy's left arm, causing blood to splatter. The surface of the paper was quickly dyed with a bright red tinge before it boomeranged back from the trapped Demoness into Klein's palm. Tracy originally imagined that the piece of paper would come at her throat, but she never expected it to only target her arm. She was momentarily stunned. Only when Gehrman Sparrow folded the piece of paper and placed it into an iron cigar case did she suddenly realize something. She asked, "Your true target is Katerina?" Klein placed the iron cigar case back into his pocket without answering her. He calmly asked, "You are her descendant?" Upon hearing this, Tracy, who was still trapped by the ice crystal and spider silk, suddenly let out a low laugh. "I'm not just a descendant. I'm her child." Child, daughter. As Klein rejoiced over his caution in not recklessly killing her, causing Demoness of White Katerina to sense something, he subconsciously analyzed whether Katerina was the mother or father of the ailment maiden. If Katerina was also formerly a male, it's possible that she's Tracy's father, but the problem is that she was already a Sequence 4 demigod during the Pale disaster that was at the end of the 4th epoch. And for the assassin pathway, a man will change into a woman at Sequence 7 witch. In other words, if Katerina is Tracy's father, Tracy needs to be at least 300 years old. However, it's impossible for a Sequence 5 Beyonder to live for so long. Even most Sequence 4 and Sequence 3 saints aren't capable of that. There's only one answer, and that is that Tracy was born by Katerina. Also, it happened in the past few decades. An advanced maternal age of more than 1,000 years. Klein nodded slightly and confirmed without any change in expression. "She's your mom?" Tracy's expression suddenly turned odd. "No, my mother." Just as he was about to ask what was the difference between that and mother, since it was essentially a more formal and eloquent manner of speech, Tracy sneered and said, "My mom is another person. She used to be my father. You demonesses have messed up families. But that isn't the reason why you spread catastrophes to the world." Klein used his clown powers to control his facial muscles as he continued looking at Ailment Maiden, his face impassive. Tracy, who was already in a dire situation, was now beginning to abandon herself to despair. Without waiting for Gehrman Sparrow's response, she sighed and gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Maybe it was all a mistake since I was born. Abnormal parents, abnormal family relationship, abnormal sect members. They sculpted me and harmed me. At the age of 8, one found out that my father, who I had always admired as a role model, had suddenly become a woman. He was becoming like a dainty flower by the day, becoming more and more adept at using his charms. Later on, he even found a male friend and gave birth to my younger brother. Can you imagine that kind of feeling? After I ran away from home and came to the sea, I finally found a normal sense of self-recognition and a social identity after many years of hard work. I finally understood what I really wanted. Then, a potion bottle turned me into a woman." "Ha, a woman." After listening quietly, Klein said without changing his tone, "Your instigation skills are pretty good." Tracy turned agape, but in the end, she only sighed and smiled with a complicated expression. "I admit that I was trying to win your sympathy. Everyone wants to live. Isn't that right? However, I didn't lie. That was my life experience." She stopped exaggerating her pain and sadness and paused. "Before you kill me, I would like to ask you a question. It's a question that won't put you in a difficult spot." "What is it?" Klein looked at the Demoness and asked. Tracy hesitated for a moment before finally asking, "Before you came to assassinate me the previous time, did Helene know about this?" Klein was silent for a moment before he said, "She didn't know what would happen." Tracy's face suddenly glowed. "Really?" Before Gehrman Sparrow could respond, she revealed an extremely complicated expression. "Before I die, can I ask you for another favor? If you can see her again, tell her that I feel very guilty about what happened in the past, but I don't regret it." At this point, Tracy tried to shake her head, but failed thanks to the restriction provided by the crystalline ice and invisible spider webs. She could only laugh at herself. Forget it, there's no need to tell her. Let's leave it at that. You can do what you were here for. With that, Tracy closed her eyes. After a few seconds, she didn't feel the pain she expected. Instead, she heard Gammon Sparrow say in a deep voice, "Say this. No one is to disturb me." Tracy was surprised as she felt perplexed, and it showed on her face. However, since she was already facing death, such a small matter wasn't worth nitpicking about. She opened her mouth and said, "No one is to disturb me." As soon as she said the statement, the same voice echoed on the Black Death, greatly amplified. The pirates didn't have any doubts about this. It was as if they were following a specific pattern. They instinctively avoided the captain's cabin and continued their work. Since the captain said not to disturb her, they naturally wouldn't seek her out. At the same time, Tracy saw Gammon Sparrow take off his top hat and press it to his chest. He bowed slightly at her, as though he was bidding her farewell. Then, she felt as though she was isolated from the entire world. There was silence. Even the crazy adventurer was gone. She had obtained the environment of not being disturbed just as she wanted. The magnify and distortion powers of the lawyer pathway. The layer of ice on Tracy's body began to melt, but the invisible spiderwebs continued to bind her firmly, preventing her from doing anything. She couldn't even change her center of gravity. Hence, she could only stand there like a lifelike wax statue. He didn't kill me. Tracy looked ahead blankly, momentarily in disbelief. She didn't believe that Gammon Sparrow hadn't taken action because he pitied her. This crazy adventurer had killed many pirates, and there had never been a situation where he showed mercy. As for Tracy, although she believed that she wasn't the typical demoness and didn't live up to her status as a demoness, how could she not have done anything bad as a pirate? She was experienced in both the slave trade and in plundering ships. Similarly, Tracy didn't believe that Gammon Sparrow was moved by her beauty and her experiences, and had ended up coveting her, because his cold gaze was like he was looking at a dead person. There must be other factors. A thought flashed through her mind as she made connections with matters she might be involved in. She quickly came to a conclusion. It's likely because of my blood relationship with Mother. As for demonesses, they're all good at hexes. Once I die, Mother will immediately notice it. When she discovers that there's a problem here, she will make preparations ahead of time, preventing Gammon Sparrow from finding his target during his subsequent actions. That's why he allowed me to live but made it impossible for me to contact anyone else. From the looks of it, regardless of the outcome of his operation targeted at Mother, he will return to kill me. And if I want to continue living, I have to succeed in saving myself before that happens. In Tracy's heart, she didn't have much of a relationship with her mother, Katerina. This demoness of unaging had lived for a long time, and most of the time, she had maintained her youthful state of mind by dating young men. She was passionate about the occasional children that she had whenever she found it novel to have one. At other times, she was mostly indifferent. However, as she grew older, Katerina's evaluation of Tracy was that she resembled her past self more and more. Hence, she was doted on her and provided more help. However, Tracy didn't want such attention. It only served to make her lose her original gender, putting her into a painful situation that she couldn't shake off. Phew. Although I hate her and blame her, I still unknowingly rely on her, hoping that she can respect my opinion more. I hope that she can escape Gammon Sparrow's pursuit. Tracy once again began to struggle in an attempt to escape her bound state. On the one hand, she was trying to save herself. On the other hand, she wanted to inform her mother to be careful of Gammon Sparrow as soon as possible. Of course, Tracy found it questionable that Gammon Sparrow, who had likely advanced to Sequence 4 recently, would be able to harm her mother. She was, after all, someone who had survived since the 4th epoch, and was a demoness with the title of unaging. However, she didn't only pin this belief on hope alone. This was because Gammon Sparrow had helpers, such as the Death Consul who even her mother feared. Plop! Tracy finally collapsed on the ground and tried to roll towards the desk. But no matter how hard she tried, she was unable to roll her body. The person she was fighting against was none other than herself, she who had been distorted and magnified. Above the gray fog, Klein had already taken his seat in the high-backed chair of the Fool. He placed the paper stained with Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's blood on the surface of the long, mottled table. Following that, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote a divination statement. Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's mother, Katerina's current location. Putting down the pen, he held the 2 pieces of paper and leaned back into his chair. He closed his eyes and repeated the words he had written. After repeating it 7 times, he entered a dream. He saw a tall and towering Gothic bell tower appear in the gray world. Around the bell tower, the white-robed Katerina stood in the shadows of a few houses. She observed the surroundings with a heavy expression, as though she was searching for something. As for the crimson moon hanging high in the sky, its position was identical to what he had seen before entering the gray fog. This meant that Demoness of White Katerina was still in Backlund. She was in Westborough, in search of a particular target. Chapter 1109 Patience Font Big Middle Small Previous Index Next add bookmarks. After ending the divination and returning to the real world, Klein walked to the room outside the rental flat. There, he pondered for nearly a minute while looking at the crimson moon in the night sky. Perhaps, there's still another chance for digesting the potion. He muttered silently as he ultimately rummaged for something. He took the 2 marionettes and disappeared into the shadows. In Backlund, he no longer dared to use Flaming Jump, afraid that it might catch Zeratl's notice. After all, it was impossible for him to always have an opportunity to ignite Willosepton's paper crane to protect himself. This was a sign of disrespect towards the Snake of Fate, and it was easy for Dr. Aaron's family to be targeted if he kept visiting them. In the blink of an eye, Klein appeared at the back of the tall Gothic-styled bell tower in his dream. He hid in the shadows, one formed by the Bell of Order, a symbol of Backlund. Immediately following that, he and his 2 marionettes split apart, each occupying different hidden spots. After doing all of this, Klein quickly turned a rat into a marionette, allowing it to run to the edge of the range of his control. It opened its mouth and softly chanted an honorific name. The great god of war, the symbol of iron and blood, the ruler of chaos and strife. Demoness of White Katerina is in this area. Since Klein was fulfilling his agreement with the Red Angel evil spirit, he also hoped that this high-level creature would step into a trap that might possibly be for him. At the same time, he had some doubts about Sauron Einhorn Medici's true intentions. He had no intention of urgently getting help from the Church of Evernight or Queen Mystic. He planned on watching from the sidelines to confirm the situation, lest he implicated others into springing a trap. Just as the prayer ended, the gray rat suddenly twitched and fell quietly beside the rubbish bin. It had already lost its life and was no longer Klein's marionette. This was a way to prevent himself from being marked by the Red Angel evil spirit. As for him, after giving up on that rat marionette, he immediately left the area where the Bell of Order was located with Konas and Anuni. He also made the winner pray to see God Calvetua a few kilometers away. After the prayer, the 2 of them continued to retreat, widening their distance. Then, Klein hid in a storage room in a particular house, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the grey fog to sit at the position of the Fool. He then beckoned for the sea god's scepter. With the help of the prayer light of the winner, he expanded his scope and observed the target area. At the same time, with his other hand, he held the piece of paper that was stained with Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's blood. With a medium like this, and a general scope, it didn't take long under his true vision before he found the hidden Demoness of White Katerina. The black-haired, blue-eyed woman was dressed in a pure white robe. She looked like a weightless feather, and she was gently drifting across the streets and alleys. Even if the patrolling policemen looked in the right direction, they were unable to detect her presence. If it wasn't for the gray fog's help, Klein could only use spirit body threads to see through the invisibility to a certain extent. Taking a deep breath, he patiently waited for the Red Angel evil spirit to appear. He also observed Katerina, wanting to know what she was looking for. He suspected that the Demoness of White was targeting Trissy Cheek. Seconds changed to minutes as the crimson moon gradually tilted to the side. Having wandered around the Bell of Order for a while without finding anything, Katerina revealed a slightly frustrated and disappointed expression. She looked as though she was about to leave that area at any time. And the Red Angel evil spirit never appeared. This Sauron Einhorn Medici was just lying to me. He really didn't have the Demoness of White as his goal? No, that's not necessarily the case. If that happened, then his condition would be meaningless. The Red Angel evil spirit has actually arrived at the scene, but has chosen not to immediately take action like me? He is waiting for the battle between Katerina and me and my companions to reach its most intense state before suddenly appearing to reap the greatest benefits. Klein's thoughts wandered as he came up with a guess. He suspected that the Red Angel evil spirit was as cautious, careful, and staid as he was. He hoped to be the fisherman pulling in the net and not that net. This is really troublesome. Next, it will depend on who's more patient. Klein muttered silently as he continued to observe the situation around the bell of order through the prayer light. Tick, tick, tick. The second hand was beating at the same pace in the quiet night. Demoness of White Katerina's expression turned increasingly gloomy. Suddenly, she cast her gaze on the glass window of a building. The dim night was like a mirror reflecting the things in front of them. Katerina's beautiful blue eyes sparkled slightly as the surface of the mirror instantly turned dark, as though there were countless objects and layers of space hidden within. The glass window seemed to have become a passageway to an alternate world. With a thought, together with the various beyonder powers that Demonis Trissi had showcased, he suspected that Katerina was about to use the mirror world to leave this place and end her hunt tonight. How can the Red Angel evil spirit still endure this? Klein tensed up as he instinctively wanted to put down the sea god scepter and return to the real world. He wanted to act against the Demoness of White and prevent her from leaving. As this thought flashed through his mind, he ultimately didn't move. He felt that he could still wait a little longer because even if Katerina left the surrounding area of the Bell of Order, he could still locate her again as long as she didn't discover that something had happened to her daughter. When the time came, he could first summon a Rhodes to ask about the target's actual abilities and items. Then, he could either seek the help of Queen Mystic Bernadette or the Church of Evernight to borrow a Grade 1 sealed artifact. He could then make the scales of victory tip towards him before taking action. I deliberately didn't hide my operation this time. If I were to borrow a sealed artifact and the Archbishop assents to it, that means that the goddess's true attitude towards George III is, she doesn't like the king becoming the Black Emperor, but she can only accept it silently. If someone is willing to disrupt the ritual, she is willing to provide some help. Klein calmed his slightly anxious feelings, allowing his observation to become more relaxed. At that moment, Demoness of White Katerina's expression returned to normal. She floated to the glass window and entered without any corporeal form. The layers of illusory worlds within the mirror converged as though they were constantly moving away. At this moment, using his true vision to observe the area underneath, Klein seemed to hear a shrill female scream. This cry seemed to come from another world. It contained extreme fear and disbelief. None of the residents in the surrounding area were jolted awake. No one heard anything. That was Katerina's scream? What exactly happened to her? Klein's gaze froze as he thought of something. The Red Angel evil spirit is also an evil spirit, and it's also capable of using mirror blink, thus, using this medium. In other words, he is no stranger to the mirror world. Could it be that Sauron Einhorn Medici had been hiding in the mirror all this time, waiting for the Demoness of White to throw herself into a trap? As his pupils dilated, the darkness and gloominess in the glass window disappeared. The mirror had lost its unique characteristics and returned to its original state. A few seconds later, the bottom of the glass window slowly bled, forming a liquid that slid down. In the areas that the liquid passed, the surrounding grayish-white tint spread, covering its original pale yellow color. It was like a newly embedded stone. Drip, drip, drip. The drops of liquid landed on the ground, dyeing it bright red like blood, beautiful like flowers. Upon seeing this scene, the muscles on Klein's face twitched slightly before he forced himself to use his clown powers to control his expression. This ending was really unexpected. A powerful and senior Sequence 3 saint, one who had lived for more than 1,000 years, was unable to put up any resistance in front of the Red Angel evil spirit's trap. There was only silence left. As for Klein himself, even if he counted the 2 marionettes and the sealed artifacts he possessed, he was still a little weaker when compared to Katerina's strength. He needed to make up for this gap through prior preparations. This also meant that, if he were to face the Red Angel evil spirit, he would probably not end up any better. He would similarly be powerless and puny, slowly sinking in the torrent that followed. Is this what a former king of angels is? Even though his strength has yet to recover to its peak state, it still leaves one in such despair. Seeing the blood seeping out from the glass window gradually lessen, he took a deep breath and returned to the real world. Following that, he and Winner and Nooni exchanged positions as he teleported to the glass window. When Bizarro sorcerers switched positions, they could only choose 2, swapping their bodies or bodies and external objects. However, it was impossible to be too precise at his current level, so Klein wasn't able to leave behind whatever he wanted. He could only choose to leave everything or not leave anything behind. Enuni, who wore Gairman Sparrow's appearance, said to the glass window in a deep voice the moment he materialized in front of it, "I have already fulfilled my promise." A figure suddenly appeared on the glass window. He was wearing a long black robe with red stripes. He casually wore a hood, revealing a soft outline. His skin was brown, and he had a pale face. He was the gatekeeper who had been possessed by Sauron Einhorn Medici. "Well done," the young man walked down from the window and said with a smile. Upon hearing this, Klein took out something from his pocket. The corners of his mouth curled up as he happily replied, "You did well too." As he spoke, he blew at the monocle in his hand and wore it on his left eye. Sauron Einhorn Medici's smile froze. Chapter 11:10 Spirit, channeling for a moment, the cold night became abnormally scorching hot, as though invisible lava was surging within it. However, everything quickly returned to normal. The Red Angel Evil Spirit sized up Klein and smiled as if nothing had happened. "I'll say it again. You have talent in being a provoker." Back when Zeratul digested the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion, even he didn't dare to pretend to be a mon in front of me. There wasn't a hint of anger in his tone. He didn't mention why Zeratul didn't dare to do so, but with his gaze sweeping across Klein, it was as if he had fallen deep inside a glacier, his body freezing in the process. This was how his actual body felt. Even though he was separated by a marionette, the back of his neck and back still had goosebumps. Without needing Sauron Einhorn Medici to say anything else, Klein understood the hidden meaning behind his words. Anyone who dared to use such a method to scare him would suffer the punishment of steel and blood on the spot. Looking at the Red Angel Evil Spirit in front of him who had a converged aura but was giving off a feeling of an extremely high level of superiority, Klein couldn't help but inwardly mutter, "If it wasn't for the fact that the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion had been digested to a certain extent, I would have thought that your willpower was as strong as steel and that your strength has returned to the level of at least a sequence 1. And now, I can basically confirm that, under your calm demeanor, you're hiding a strong fear towards Amon. This also means that your current level is at most at sequence 2. Besides, I was already mentally prepared to lose a marionette. In order to quickly digest the potion, I had to take the risk. If Danitz was here and he was given the opportunity to shout out coward twice, he could probably quickly digest the provoker potion even if he had drunk 4 or 5 bottles. Without further agitating the Red Angel Evil Spirit, Klein smiled and took off the monocle. Back in the Solomon Empire, Zeratul should already be an angel. How would he still need to digest the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion? "I'm talking about the young Zeratul," Sauron Einhorn Medici said casually. "This is consistent with the description from the grandpa in Leonard's body." Klein nodded indiscernibly and focused on the main topic at hand. "You've already finished off the Demoness of White? What do you think?" The Red Angel Evil Spirit laughed and said, "Also, one must be polite. Since Katarina calls herself the Saintess of White, then you shouldn't call her a Demoness anymore." Polite. A hunter emphasizing manners with me. At that instant, the corners of Klein's mouth twitched, expressing the ludicrousness of the matter, but he ultimately held back. From the looks of it, provoking isn't limited to ridiculing and cursing others. Danitz, who only knows how to curse using one word, is a disgrace to hunters. As he thought, Klein said, "I've already fulfilled my promise. I think you don't mind giving me a small reward." "Reward?" The Red Angel Evil Spirit scoffed and asked. Klein ignored his attitude and continued, "I wish to communicate with the Demoness of White. I want to ask her something." "Just this request?" The Red Angel Evil Spirit asked in amusement. Klein nodded. "That's right. No problem." Sauron Einhorn Medici raised his right hand and grabbed at his glabella. From there, a blurry figure was pulled out. It was none other than Saintess of White Katarina, whose facial expression was filled with horror. "Can we have a private conversation?" Seeing this, Klein looked around. The Red Angel Evil Spirit immediately laughed and said, "Do you need a room where the two of you can be together? Think about it with that brain of yours. Even if you want to hide the questions you would like to raise from me, I can still find out through Katarina's spirit. That is, of course, unless you don't plan on returning her to me? Or are you a little boy who needs things to follow a ritual?" Klein made the marionette reply with a deadpan expression. "I have a way to make her forget my questions." This was both the truth and a lie. The truth was that he could use Vin Rambise's manipulator's Beyonder characteristic to complete the job. However, it was relatively difficult, and the chance of failure was very high. Furthermore, the negative effects weren't minor. The reason why he lied was because he had no intention of doing so. This would expose many important matters. He only had one purpose in saying this: to make the Red Angel evil spirit suspect that the answers obtained weren't the truth and that there were key hidden parts beneath the surface. From that, he would ignore the value of the answers obtained on the surface. This worked wonders on people who were highly suspicious. Of course, there was no hope of success. After all, the entity opposite him was the Red Angel, who was master of conspiracies. Not bad. After Sauron Einhorn Medici heard Klein's reply, his body suddenly vanished, projecting itself onto the glass window. Klein glanced at the blood that had already coagulated on the grey stones, feeling somewhat wistful as he brought the somewhat muddle-headed demoness of White Katarina far away from the glass and into a dark alley. He then took out candles, essential oils, and herbal powders. He set up an altar and prayed to the Evernight goddess, hoping that he could use ritualistic magic to complete the mediumship. This was a skill he had mastered when he was still a Nighthawk. As the ritual was completed, an immense and terrifying power descended from an indescribable height, causing the surroundings to become unusually quiet. Klein's eyes instantly darkened, as it was like the dark night was compressed. He then saw more things around Katarina's spirit: flickering light and blurry mind storms. He easily passed through those obstacles and faced the demoness of White's body of heart and mind. Has the cooperation between the demoness sect and George III come to an end? Without being careless, Klein began from a less sensitive question to observe Katarina's condition. The dazed and confused look on Katarina's face faded a little as she nodded with a pure smile. Yes. Then why are you still in Backlund? Klein asked further. Katarina replied solemnly. I'm in pursuit of Trissy. She took an important sealed artifact from us. What's the sealed artifact? Klein suddenly recalled the sapphire ring that Demoness Trissy had once worn on her hand. It was intricately made. Demoness of White Katarina said with a pious expression, it has something to do with the awakening of Primordial. Apart from its high level at grade 0, it doesn't have any special abilities. Indeed, it has to do with the Primordial Demoness. You people even changed Trissy's name to Trissy Cheek. Klein didn't reveal that he knew the true name of the Primordial Demoness. Instead, he asked, do you know where the other 8 mausoleums of George III are? Katarina frowned slightly and answered in a manner meant to garner sympathy. They're separately located in the southwest suburbs of Backlund, Awa County, Eastchester County. This Demoness of White first gave a simple account of the locations of the 8 mausoleums before introducing their specific locations and situations in detail. The 8 mausoleums have already been repaired. They temporarily deactivated the teleportation tunnel. Even if they have the corresponding charms, there's no way to open them again. It's almost impossible to find them directly from the outside world. Other than Prince Grove, Duchess Georgina, the 2 angels of the royal family, and George III, no one else can enter. Well, some of those places were places where Kona's Kilgore often went hunting, so it matches my guess. This means that the Demoness of White isn't lying. I'll make a confirmation above the grey fog later. If this is really the case, it would be quite troublesome. With the current situation, be it Prince Grove or Duchess Georgina, they would definitely be in the sights of the angels. The biggest hurdle is entering the ruins. Once entry is gained, what follows won't be that dangerous. War has already broken out, and there's a need to fight against the Phasacians. Demigods are a limited resource, so there's no way George III can have every ruin be guarded by a saint, with the option of an angel to provide reinforcements. As Klein's thoughts raced, he first posed a question. The royal family has 2 angels? In fact, that's not the case. It's very likely that George III is also one, Katarina replied honestly. One of those 2 angels is the founder of the Lone Kingdom, Protector William I, who has survived since the 4th epoch. He is a Sequence 1 Hand of Order of the Arbiter pathway, while the other is the former Duke of Southville, Dlink Augustus. He is a Sequence 2 Balancer. As for how many Grade 0 sealed artifacts the royal family has, I'm not sure. The founder on the 10-pound note is still alive? I have the feeling that history has seeped into reality again. After some thought, he nodded and asked, why are you working with George III? For a conqueror beyond a characteristic. It's already in our hands. Katarina's expression became a little excited. Conqueror was the name of the Red Priest Pathway's Sequence 1 potion. Then, will it belong to the Primordial Demoness, or belong to the upper echelons of your sect? Klein asked thoughtfully. Who are the higher-ups of your sect? It will be sacrificed to Primordial. However, we have to find the sealed artifact that Trissy took away first. Currently, it has been kept by the Saintess of Black. All the higher-ups of our sect have colors as their code names, Katerina answered truthfully. After understanding more details, Klein terminated the spirit channeling, cleaned up the altar, and allowed the demoness of white spirit to return to the glass window from before. As for himself, his body suddenly turned transparent. With the help of teleportation, he disappeared from this region, rendezvousing with his actual body and his other marionette. After watching Gehrman Sparrow leave, the gloominess and confusion on Katerina's face suddenly vanished as her expression became extremely astute. She then entered the glass window which had turned dark again. A few seconds later, Sauron Einhorn Medici and Demoness of White Katerina walked out of the mirror together. The latter's figure was clear and filled with flesh. She showed no signs of death. Are you saying that he was asking about the other 8 secret mausoleums of George III? The power of the spirit channeling came from Evernight? The Red Angel evil spirit stroked his chin and turned to ask Katerina. The Demoness of White nodded slightly and said, "That's right." Heh! The Red Angel evil spirit immediately laughed. So he doesn't want George III to become the Black Emperor. Katerina's eyes darted around as she revealed a smile. But it's impossible to succeed. No matter how fast he advances or how much help he receives, there's no way he can resist the combined forces of the royal family, the military, and that organization. No, if it's just the Augustus family with his level and strength, he won't be able to do anything, unless Evernight personally descends. Having said that, this Demoness of White asked in a seemingly casual manner, I'm very puzzled. Why didn't you kill me directly after grasping the absolute advantage over me? The Red Angel evil spirit glanced at her as the corners of his mouth slowly curled up. Do you think you have the right to be my true target? Chapter 11:11 Poker Expert. Upon hearing the Red Angel evil spirit's reply, Demoness of White Katerina's expression instantly froze, unable to contain her anger. Sauron Einhorn Medici laughed and continued, You must have become a demigod at the end of the 4th epoch. It's been more than 1,000 years, but you haven't become an angel. Don't you feel inferior? As for that fellow just now, he had to rely on Azek Eggers to face you head-on in the beginning. He was as weak as a chick that had just hatched. But now, in less than a year, he has already advanced to Sequence 4 and obtained godhood. He has the ability to match your strength. Don't you have any thoughts about this? Didn't you think that the past 1,000 years were a waste? Even a dog might open the gates to angelhood after living for more than 1,000 years. I know what you're thinking. You're very jealous, and on the other hand, you also have a twisted desire. You want to prove yourself by sleeping with him. You demonesses are really laughable. On the one hand, you insist that you were originally men so as to prevent yourself from losing yourself, thus resulting in you losing control. On the other hand, you have to showcase the charm of a woman and try your hand at extreme pleasure and intense love. But we hunters have no such problem. Regardless of what gender we were in the beginning, all we need to do in the future is war, war, war. Primordial really is a twisted fellow. Letting a pure woman take the path of a demoness would be so much better. However, generation after generation, you pass the damage down. And for what? Isn't the main goal merely to seek revenge on fate? Every word of the Red Angel evil spirit was like an arrow that stabbed into the heart of the Demoness of White. It made her beautiful and exquisite face twitch, and her smooth raven-black long hair seemed to grow thicker. Sauron Einhorn Medici glanced at Katerina and immediately chortled. Don't tell me that you're losing control because of my provocation? What a nostalgic feeling. The Red Angel evil spirit paused for a moment before saying, You can leave now. If there's anything, then remember to recite my honorific name. Of course, I will come to you directly if I have to. Demoness of White Katerina's expression returned to normal. She frowned slightly and asked in disbelief, You're letting me leave, just like that? The Red Angel evil spirit chuckled. Why? Do you want to sleep with me? It's not impossible if the timing is right, but there's something very important that needs to be done right now. Don't worry. Since you've already recited my honorific name and given me a drop of your blood, you'll be under my watch, and you can be affected by me at any moment. Have you already forgotten the differences between an angel and a saint? Don't you know how powerful a real high-level figure is? Heh, unless you directly pray to Primordial and receive a response. Otherwise, you'll never be able to free yourself from my gaze. Well, in normal circumstances, an angel can do such a thing, but that's only limited to the situation of you only chanting my honorific name. If you don't believe me, I'll let you seek the help of an angel. Demoness of White Katarina listened with a gloomy expression before finally smiling. I'll keep your teachings in mind, Lord Medici. Sauron Einhorn Medici's eyebrows twitched. You don't seem so compliant. I can even imagine how you were when you faced Gehrman Sparrow, but I don't care. Ah, I forgot to tell you. It's best if you immediately confirm the condition of your bloodline descendants. Don't you find it suspicious that Gehrman Sparrow managed to find you so easily? Katarina's face turned slightly pale, but then it grew serious. She slowly nodded and said, I understand. With that said, she immediately retreated and entered the glass window again. It was unknown where she was headed for in the illusory, stacked mirror world. With the Demoness of White disappearing, a bloody gash suddenly appeared on the left side of the Red Angel Evil Spirit's left cheek and made a sound. What an excellent actress. She made it seem like she wasn't good at controlling her expression, showing her restlessness and lack of intelligence as though it was easy for her ulterior motives to be discovered. That's right. That way, there's a high chance that we would belittle her and let our guard down against her. The Red Angel Evil Spirit's right cheek also cracked open in a hideous manner. Tisk, demonesses are indeed very cunning. However, I've never underestimated any prey. The Red Angel Evil Spirit used his normal mouth to say, She wants to desensitize me and make me belittle her, but it's impossible. The bloody gash on his left cheek opened and closed and replied, Then why were you captured by a Listitutor? That's because of the two of you. The personality that belonged to Medici pouted and said, It had nothing to do with belittlement and desensitization. The blood-colored crack on his right snorted and said, How does it feel like to become someone else's prey? The mighty god of war, the Red Angel beside the Creator? Not bad. Medici's expression darkened a little, but his words seemed to contain some self-complacency. The personality that belonged to Sauron said with the left cheek, You really like to bluff in order to achieve your goals. Back then, Alista and company managed to see through your lies, which was why they managed to seize the opportunity. And just now, you were bluffing Katarina. You're only capable of releasing your aura, relying on traps and surprise attacks to bring about a certain amount of damage. There was no way you could quickly finish her off, but you pretended that you had returned to your Sequence 1 state, tricking her into reciting your honorific name and handing over her blood. Medici pouted again and said, A bluff is also a normal playstyle in poker. The effect is pretty good, isn't it? At this point, the Red Angel chuckled and said, Furthermore, it's not just a bluff. What I'm most fond of is to mix in a truth or two every few bluffs, allowing me to wait for fellows who think they've seen through my disguise to step into a trap. It's just like the mistakes you two idiots made back then. But you were the first to die. The two sides of the Red Angel Evil Spirit's face cracked at the same time. Without any hesitation, Medici said, That means I'm the strongest, worthy of having the most attention. With that said, the three personalities of the Red Angel Evil Spirit fell silent at the same time. After a few seconds, the blood-colored crack that represented Einhorn opened and closed. Gehrman Sparrow's connection with Evernight is tighter than I imagined. He should have noticed Katarina's true state just now. Medici chuckled and said, It's all right. This is something she has tacitly allowed in the first place. Back when the Great Smog of Backland happened, the ones who participated in the operation are all gone. Only that demoness named Trissy is still alive. Isn't that enough to explain something? Sauron and Einhorn didn't speak further as they allowed the bloody crack on the cheeks to wriggle and heal. The Red Angel Evil Spirit then reflected himself on the glass window and disappeared from the area around the Bell of Order. Above the grayish-white fog, inside the ancient palace, looking at the spinning topaz pendant in his hand, Klein nodded indiscernibly. He had already used spirit dowsing to confirm Katarina's answers, and he came up with a concrete conclusion. Right on the heels of that, he began his dream divination based on what he knew of the 8 secret mausoleums. He saw the corresponding areas and their blurry states. This made him understand that entry was impossible via normal methods. Even the process of prying without interference had difficulties in locating the interior of the mausoleums. This is very troublesome. Also, when I was channeling the demoness of White Girl's spirit, it was quite different from the time when I did it for Kona's Kilgore and Vin Rambus. She had too many expressions, and her answer was more proactive. Is this something special about demonesses, or is it due to other factors?
With a thought, he beckoned with his hand to draw out a piece of paper that was stained with Vice Admiral Ailment's blood.
He wrote down the corresponding sentence and made a dream divination to search for his target. In the blurry world, Klein saw Tracy, who had escaped from her spiderwebs, looking out the window. There was a dark and illusory storm around there, making it impossible for him to know where it was.
Tracy has escaped. She doesn't look sad.
She only feels a certain amount of anger and confusion. Her relationship with the demoness of white is so terrible? Or could it be? Just as he was feeling puzzled, he saw a black flame suddenly ignite and melt his dream away.
He opened his eyes and confirmed that he could no longer use the blood in his hand to divine the location of Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy.
This meant that a demigod powerhouse had used a mysticism technique to sever the connection between the two. Could it be that the demoness of White Katarina isn't dead yet? Right, when the Red Angel evil spirit answered me, he was using rhetorical questions. He didn't admit it at all.
I was channeling the spirit of a living person.
Klein was instantly enlightened as he hurriedly made another divination. Finally, he confirmed that the demoness of white really was still alive. Indeed, the Red Angel evil spirit's true target isn't the demoness of white. Also, combined with the feedback from the progress of my potion's digestion, is it right for me to say that the Red Angel evil spirit is weaker than I imagined?
He hasn't even recovered to the level of Sequence 2, and he was unable to quickly finish off the demoness of white. He could only rely on other means to subdue her?
After pondering for a moment, Klein realized he couldn't come to a conclusion.
He quickly reined in his thoughts and stopped considering the problem.
This was because he had already obtained the information he needed from demoness of White Katarina.
Klein put down the piece of paper that was stained with Vice Admiral Ailment's blood and suddenly chuckled. Severing the connection between the blood and the body, preventing powers of divination and prophecy from using it as a medium?
I wonder if it will work when rubbing it on the surface of Grozel's travels?
After looking at the piece of paper for a few seconds, Klein temporarily gave up on the idea of testing it, because there was no need for it.
His focus quickly shifted to the other 8 mausoleums of George III. Ordinary lines of thought shouldn't work.
The things that I can come up with are definitely things that the angels and saints under George III can figure out as well. If it wasn't for the fact that the gods have already tacitly allowed this matter, exposing this matter by printing it on flyers might have been effective.
Teleportation nexus. The Tudor ruins. As he thought about it, a thought suddenly came to his mind. He had an idea. Chapter 11-12 Traveling Notebook Lord of the Mysteries in the magnificent palace above the grey fog. Klein stretched out his right hand and tapped the edge of the long mottled table as he muttered silently. The 5 large family clans of the Tudor dynasty are Amon, Abraham, Antigonus, Jacob, and Tamara. The one who helped Alista Tudor become Blood Emperor were the kings of angels, Adam, Amon, and Abraham. Can it be inferred that, during the time of the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire, there were the consuls, Amon and Abraham standing beside Alista? If that's the case, Blood Emperor Alista Tudor didn't have plans on switching paths in the beginning. When he secretly constructed the mausoleums, he likely would have sought the help of one or more of the following: Amon, Abraham, and Antigonus. As for Bethel Abraham, he's Mr. Door, and he grasps the apprentice pathway. When it comes to teleportation, even a true deity might not be as good as him. So, could the teleportation nexus in the Tudor ruins be set up by Bethel Abraham? There's a high chance of that. Yes, only important figures like Mr. Door can enter and exit a secret ruin at such a level. Even my divination above the grey fog is unable to pinpoint its location. Likewise, it's difficult for an angel who wields concealment to enter it directly. Amidst his thoughts, Klein was leaning more and more towards his own guess being closer to that of reality. I wonder if Mr. Door left behind any relevant information to provide accurate coordinates or methods of entry. This would require Miss Magician to ask her teacher again. Sigh, I really hope that Miss Magician can become a traveler as soon as possible. That way, she wouldn't need to rely on writing letters to contact her teacher. She could teleport over directly. Yes, she can do it now, but the act of being able to record so many traveling spells would scare her teacher and arouse suspicion. It's really troublesome. If there are no records left behind by the Abraham family, do I have to attempt to converse with Mr. Door? Not only is this troublesome, but it's also dangerous. Most importantly, Miss Magician isn't even sequence 5 yet. She hasn't been able to clearly hear, much less respond to Mr. Door. It's impossible for me to turn her into my marionette or descend onto her body. Early on, Klein had seriously considered communicating with Mr. Door through Miss Magician when he first pulled her above the gray fog. Later, after he came to learn more, he grew increasingly apprehensive about the idea, and he didn't dare take the risk. Furthermore, the level he was at now lacked the measures that spelled sufficiency and security. As his thoughts churned, he suddenly sighed and said a word, patience, at sea, on an island with relatively high pirate activity. Furs raised her glass and took a sip of the transparent and colorless liquid in anticipation. Her face scrunched up as if she had tasted something hard to swallow. Uft, isn't this Lanty-proof too inferior? Why are they having so much fun drinking this? Furs put down her cup, raised her right hand, and fanned her mouth. She softly muttered, apart from the alcohol content, it doesn't have any other strengths.
Oh right, it's also cheap.
After drinking a mouthful of cold water from another cup, Furs picked up a fountain pen and wrote in a rather poor-quality notebook. The pirates here are only in pursuit of strong liquor while keeping an eye on the price.
To them, being drunk is more important than anything else. 3 pirate friends that I know have told me that this port city was built by them. At first, they only docked their ships here to hide their loot and settle their families. Later on, the bankrupt, adventurers, and tax fugitives came to this place and settled down. They also plowed the lands on the island and built houses. Finally, an entrepot market was formed, and the merchants at sea swarmed over like sharks smelling blood. At this point, Furs looked up at the 3 pirates curled up in a corner. Do you have anything else to say? The 3 burly pirates trembled at the same time and said with a mournful expression, No, really. We have nothing. I have to say that it feels pretty good to imitate Mr. World's attitude when it comes to dealing with pirates. Furs sighed and shook her head. She retracted her gaze and continued writing. There's a liberal mood here. If the women are interested in any man, they can, like the men, offer a price. Similarly, it works when a man catches the eye of another man, or when a woman catches the eye of another woman. According to my 3 pirate friends, due to the long periods of repression and boredom while drifting out at sea, it's inevitable for some people to experiment with certain forbidden taboos. In this aspect, they've been very honest and even described their experiences. In addition, they informed me of things that I never dared believed. Pirates actually advocate the concept of democracy and justice. This has completely overturned my understanding. But on careful thought, it doesn't seem difficult to understand. At least they didn't say that they were pursuing justice. The explanation from my 3 pirate friends is that when a person with his weapons doesn't have absolute, overwhelming strength, it's always the case of there being tyranny from the majority on a pirate ship. Furthermore, a large ship requires a lot of people to run it. When these factors are combined, it makes the pirate crew very particular about democracy. There will always be a captain who will be voted by his or her crew now and then to be banished or even killed. I believe that if a captain possesses absolute strength, the pirate crew would definitely develop another style of governance. At this point, Furs looked out the window again and saw that, under the blue sky and white clouds, buildings made of wood and rocks formed a dense circle around a market. From time to time, she could see a few children in tattered clothes skipping past. Upon hearing the extremely lively commotion, Furs wrote again. There's no urban planning here at all. Everyone casually builds their houses and expands their borders. As a result, many roads only allow for one person to walk through. There's no sunlight at all. My first reaction is that once a fire breaks out, the outcome will be extremely terrifying. Backlund once had a similar tragedy. However, my 3 pirate friends told me that this isn't something worth worrying about, because it's humid and often rains here. People with special powers never keep it under wraps. This place is still under the influence of war. Although it's chaotic, it gives people a sense of tranquility. Also, what they're most afraid of isn't the King of the 5 Seas, Nast, or all sorts of horrifying legends, but rather of the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow. Every pirate is warned by their peers not to drink too late into the night. They shouldn't take a walk in the middle of the night or use small alleys. That's because it might lead to them going missing. And the murderer is rumored to be that gentleman. Is this a form of hunting? As she wrote, Furz's expression gradually turned solemn. She hurriedly pulled out another stack of paper and added on the content. There's a unique coldness that wafts through the hospital at night, and the darkness outside the window is much thicker than other places.
No one knows why that young lady who lives in a single ward gets her family members to bring her mushrooms and weeds. No one knows where these things end up. In short, there were no signs of any fires in the ward, and there's no abandoned junk outside. This makes the nurses suspect that the patient is secretly eating mushrooms and weeds. Standing in front of the mountain, Afternoon Town, which was divided into 3 regions of the top, middle and bottom, had a camp set up by the City of Silver. Derek Berg clasped his hands and placed them in front of his mouth, softly chanting, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." After piously chanting, he stood up and picked up the ancient bronze cross that was covered with sharp spikes, walking towards the bonfire outside. As the unshadowed crucifix couldn't coexist with other mystical items, his giant hammer named Thunder God's Roar could only be temporarily left to Chaim and Joshua to carry with them. As the City of Silver's expedition team gathered, Klein, who was in Backlund, had already arrived above the grey fog. He picked up the sea god scepter and, with the help of one of the crimson stars burgeoning and contracting, he saw the situation in Afternoon Town, and he expanded his vision towards the giant king's court. If he didn't use the prayer light and the sea god scepter, Klein was unable to expand his field of view by relying only on the crimson stars. As his gaze moved, a beautiful but deep dusk gradually appeared in his eyes. In the area where dusk was frozen, there were countless palaces, countless towers, and many majestic city walls. They were magnificent and opulent, resembling a miracle found in myths and legends. Furthermore, they were frozen in time. The giant king's court. As he tried to zoom in with his vision, Klein realized that he was unable to see the exact situation beneath the dusk. As expected of the divine kingdom of an ancient god, and it's not the kind that has been abandoned or hidden. It's no wonder that the kings of angels chose this place for a secret gathering. I hope that little son's prayer after entering the giant king's court will help me see it more clearly. Klein nodded thoughtfully. At the same time, he focused a portion of his attention on Shepherd Elder Lovia. He discovered that this lady had an illusory silver armor covering her entire body. This should be the evil spirit she grazed. I haven't seen any effects from the true creator yet. Klein slowly let out a breath and patiently waited for the subsequent developments. After a while, under the lead of Chief Colin Iliad, the 9-men expedition team, including Derek Berg, left the Afternoon Town camp. They followed the stairs paved with grey stones and walked towards the peak of the mountain. They were at least sequence 6 beyonders, and most of them belonged to the warrior pathway. They moved at relatively fast speeds, clearing a few waves of monsters that were mainly rotten giants. Finally, they arrived at the region shrouded by dusk. They were shocked by the grand and epic building, and no one spoke for a short period of time. This was also the first time they had encountered a place where there were no flashes of lightning, a place that was illuminated by natural light. Demon Hunter Colin narrowed his eyes. He took out a small metal bottle and drank the liquid inside. After their evolution over the many generations, they were more accustomed to the dark environment with frequent lightning. They were instinctively afraid of such a situation that was in a state of frozen twilight. It was both a point of hope and fear. After drinking the prepared potion and mentally preparing himself, Colin Iliad and Shepherd Lovia led the members of the expedition team as they stepped into the region illuminated by the sunset. Before Derek could sense anything, he saw the unshadowed crucifix in his hand drop, revealing a corporeal form formed from pure light. However, the light emitted by the corporeal body was no longer pure. It was tainted with an orange-red color unique to dusk. Right on the heels of that, Derek felt his condition plummet. It was as if he was at the weakest point of the day, ready to welcome the approaching night. Chapter 11:13 Powerful Guardian. The towering building stood quietly in the frozen dusk. There wasn't any sound in the area, as though it was just an oil painting. After passing through such an environment, Derek Berg became even more high-strung than when he had explored the depths of the darkness. The hair on his back stood on end. After entering a place shrouded in dusk, the entire exploration team, including Chief Colin Iliad and Shepherd Elder Lovia, couldn't help but show signs of exhaustion and looking worn out. It was as if they had reached the end of their lives. And as they proceeded forward, rotting giants ran out of different buildings in increasing numbers and increasing strength. With one side weakened and the other side strengthened, it became difficult for them to advance. After several intense battles, the City of Silver's expedition team finally broke through the lockdown and barricades of the monsters and came to an extremely quiet area. There wasn't any sound at all, and that only served to leave their scalps tingling. With regards to this, Demon Hunter Colin Iliad had no choice but to break the silence and remind everyone. This means that we have truly entered the Giant King's court and are about to approach the core region. The danger level will only increase and not decrease. Upon hearing this, a few members of the expedition team began to waver due to the influence of the twilight. From their point of view, although they didn't dare to stay in one place in the earlier stages most of the time, afraid that they would be surrounded by the rotting giants, they had ultimately eliminated all the monsters in a tiny area. They felt that they could rest for a while and obtain many Beyonder characteristics, mystical ingredients, and potion formulas. This expedition could be said to have been very fruitful, leaving them no reason to continue delving deeper. What they should do was seek out a suitable building and set up an advance camp to make preparations for a second expedition. Faced with such a suggestion, Colin Iliad didn't say much. He only emphasized that the objective of this explorer was to figure out the general situation of the Giant King's court as much as possible, so as to accumulate sufficient information for the subsequent operations. Then, he let one of the members named Antiona to placate those who had wavering wills. As the shepherd elder Lovia also supported the chief, a small number of the members of the expedition team quickly adjusted their mindset and quietly followed the chief forward. After a while, they saw a huge stone staircase. It was entirely grayish-white, but it was dyed with an orange-yellow glow. It was gorgeous and silent. Every step of the staircase was relatively high. If it were any ordinary human, they would definitely find it very difficult to walk. Fortunately, the shortest member of the expedition team, Elder Lovia, was nearly 1.9 meters tall, and she could muster strong winds. On the huge staircase, it was so majestic that one had to look up to see the city walls at the top. There were many signs of burn marks and damage on the walls, and some places were impaled with arrows that were as thick as ordinary trees. The several-meter-long arrows had even caused some rocks to crumble. In the middle of the city wall was a door that was tens of meters tall. Its color was closer to grayish-blue, and there were golden nails embedded in it. There were 2 guards standing outside that exuded an extremely oppressive stance simply by looking at them. They were 5 to 6 meters tall, wearing exquisite, sturdy silver full-body armor. One of them held a great sword, while the other held a great axe towards the ground. Behind the armored visor, there was a ball of orange light that looked like a single eye. Silver Knight. Demon Hunter Colin raised his right hand and swung his sword horizontally to stop the members of the expedition team behind him. He had long removed the 2 swords on his back and applied different concoctions on them. Silver Knight. Derek Berg's eyelids twitched as he felt his heart palpitate. He had recently come into contact with information that only the upper echelons of the City of Silver knew about. He knew that the Giant Pathways Sequence 3 was called Silver Knight. He also knew that the City of Silver lacked the correct potion formula, but it had the corresponding Beyonder characteristic. What horrified Derek was that the guards of the Giant King's Court Core were actually 2 Sequence 3 demigods. This was a level higher than the City of Silver's strongest combat force. This was only the area of the Royal Court's entrance, so it was questionable what they would encounter if they ventured deeper. After the initial shock, Derek couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Perhaps, he could find the potion formulas after the Giant Pathways Sequence 4 in the Giant King's Court. That way, the chief could become a Silver Knight and greatly increase the strength of the City of Silver. When the time came, they could explore the Giant King's Court at a deeper level, find more potion formulas, hunt more monsters, and obtain even higher-level Beyonder characteristics and magical materials. Subconsciously, Derek looked around and discovered that the reactions of the other members of the expedition team, such as Joshua, Hyam, and Antiona, were basically identical to his. They were both nervous and fearful, but also somewhat hopeful. At this moment, Shepherd Elder Lovia took 2 steps forward and stood beside Colin Iliad. She looked up at the gray-blue door and the 2 Silver Knights who were in an unknown state and said, "If there was only one, then we would have a chance of finishing it off." What she really meant was that, now that there were 2 Silver Knights, even if they were willing to suffer heavy casualties, they were unable to clear the enemies. After all, even if the chief could control his mythical creature form and normally battle a Sequence 3, the environment here didn't permit him to make similar attempts. The decadence that the twilight had brought might make something that could previously be resisted into something impossible to withstand. Colin Iliad nodded and glanced at both Lovia and Derek Berg before observing the area ahead. From the looks of it, as long as we don't get close to that door, the 2 guards won't attack us. Perhaps we can try to lure one of the Silver Knights away to finish it off? The female warrior named Antiona suggested after some deliberation. She had long wine-red hair, and her facial features weren't considered exquisite. However, when combined together,
She looked extremely elegant and beautiful. In this expedition, her main mission was to rely on a sealed artifact she wielded to treat her teammates' psychological problems and fight against enemies of the psyche domain. Her exact thoughts were to wait for the members to lure one of the Silver Knights away before using the terrain and their combined efforts. As for the chief and Elder Lovia, they could work together to deal with the remaining one as soon as possible. This was a textbook solution that the City of Silver had used in situations they had encountered. Even if there's only one Silver Knight, it will be very difficult. Furthermore, there's no guarantee that the Silver Knight you lure away won't directly reveal its mythical creature form. Demon Hunter Colin firmly rejected her suggestion. Ignoring the fact that the Silver Knight had powerful Beyonder powers, as long as it revealed its mythical creature form, most of the members of the City of Silver's expedition team wouldn't be able to look at it directly and would be affected. There was no way they could run circles with it. Without waiting for the rest of the team members to speak, Colin Iliad looked back and said, "Let's take another path." Derek found some information in the World of Reflections in Afternoon Town. It recorded a tunnel behind the giant king's court. Shepherd Elder Lovia cast her gaze on Derek Berg. She was indifferent, calm, and without any emotions. Derek subconsciously raised the unshadowed crucifix higher, restraining his indescribable shivers. "All right." Lovia agreed with Colin Iliad's suggestion. Hence, the expedition team retreated from the huge stone staircase and headed left. Before long, they saw a rugged trail. On the right was a towering cliff, and on the left was a bottomless chasm that was tainted with the glow of the sunset. Of course, it was only a trail for giants. To the members of the City of Silver's expedition team, it was still relatively spacious. As they proceeded forward, Derek and company's spiritual perception were triggered as they subconsciously looked to the side. At the edge of the cliff, grayish-blue swollen palms stretched out from the orange clouds and grabbed onto the ground. They were densely packed and difficult to count. If they were all giants, even if they were sequence 7 or 6 giants, they were able to destroy the City of Silver's expedition team here relying on sheer numbers. Just as Colin Iliad was about to swing his sword, Derek suddenly had a strange, subtle feeling. He quickly raised the unshadowed crucifix higher and pressed one of his fingers onto a particular thorn, causing bright red blood to seep out. The pure cross emitted a bright twilight glow as though it had returned to the state of noon. They surged towards the edge of the cliff, enveloping the gray-blue giants that attempted to climb up. The giants froze at the same time as their bodies began to fade, quickly melting away. They weren't real giants, but that of wraith and shadows left behind after the tragic deaths of those giants. Therefore, the unshadowed crucifix had sensed them. It was a saint-level sealed artifact of the Sun Domain, the nemesis of wraiths, shadows, and evil spirits. After easily killing these monsters, the City of Silver's expedition team warily continued proceeding forward. After a while, they finally circled around the mountain wall and cliff and saw a dark forest. In the forest, the trees were tens of meters tall and were extremely thick. However, their barks were peeling off, and the trunks rotting. The leaves were withered, giving the feeling that they were waning. The leaves were supposed to be entangled together, but they formed a barricade in midair, blocking the light of dusk, darkening its interior. But at that moment, due to the large number of collapsed and fallen trees, the orange-red glow had already scattered across most of the areas within the forest that were visible with the naked eye. Derek looked ahead and silently calculated how much longer he could use the unshadowed crucifix. He said to the chief and his teammates, "This is the waning forest where the ancestors of the giants are buried. In other words, the giant king's parents." Colin Iliad stared at the forest and said, "It has already been destroyed. Even if there are still remnants of danger, it won't be too powerful. We can try exploring it." "Yes, Your Excellency," Derek replied without hesitation. "My cross can deal with the environment here. I'll walk in front." He remembered that Mr. World had reminded him that there might be some kind of corruption lurking in the forest, and that the unshadowed crucifix could provide him with an effective warning. The grizzled Colin nodded gently and said, "Be careful of your surroundings." Derek took a silent breath and took a large stride forward and walked towards the waning forest. At the same time, he used the convenience of walking ahead to softly recite Mr. Fool's honorific name. Then Klein, whose gaze that had been blocked by the dusk and had been disconnected for some time, could finally see the actual situation. However, he was unable to significantly expand his range of sight.
Chapter 11:14 The Remnant. Well, the forest that should have been engulfed in darkness and in decline was filled with the orange-red light of dusk. The light was intense and burned like fire, but it couldn't help but carry a sense of brilliance with it that couldn't be ignored. With the unshadowed crucifix that seemed like pure light condensating in his hand, Derek Berg slowly walked ahead. The grizzled demon hunter Colin, who was walking behind him to the left, held two straight swords in his hand. Hyam, who was walking behind him to the right, held the Thunder God's roar hammer. This 2-meter-tall half-giant was prepared to switch the hammer for the sealed artifact with Derek at any time. The radiance emitted by the unshadowed crucifix became increasingly dim, as though the sun had already set in the horizon, leaving only a sliver of golden light. Of course, no one from the City of Silver had ever seen such a scene before. They could only use the descriptions from ancient literature to imagine it. Similarly, this was the first time they understood what a sunset meant. Whoosh! As the exploration team ventured deeper, a wind began to blow in the nearly frozen waning forest. It was as if countless living beings were weeping deep within the forest. However, Derek and company didn't feel any effects of the wind. Whoosh! The sound of the wind intensified, making his heart tremble. Derek suddenly felt a chill run down his neck, causing his hair to stand on end. His body and mind turned cold. Generally speaking, it was human instinct to shrink their necks, raise their arms, and defend their backs at such moments in time. They would then half-turn their bodies, observe the situation, and be ready to attack. However, Derek didn't do so, because in a dangerous environment, rashness would often result in terrible situations. Furthermore, he had the chief and his teammate behind him. He had full faith in them that they would react in time. Thus, he had handed his life to them. With a swoosh, a silvery white blade wrapped by a small snake-like electric bolt flew across the side of Derek's neck, vaporizing a blurry and twisted figure into the light of dusk. At the same time, the unshadowed crucifix was triggered by something. It suddenly broke out of its gloomy and dim state, making the light it emitted to once again become bright and pure. Dawn seemed to come to the surrounding area immediately as indescribable black shadows began to show themselves in the light of dawn before quickly melting away. After everything calmed down, Derek looked ahead and asked curiously, "What are these?" "They don't look like wraiths, shadows, or evil spirits." Demon Hunter Colin surveyed the area and slowly said, "A remnant aura of some sort. They seem to have combined with the power of dusk, causing a certain anomaly. I've never seen such monsters." Derek tightened his grip on the unshadowed crucifix and moved his other finger, which hadn't been stabbed, onto the thorns. Relying on the unshadowed crucifix, which was the nemesis of the evil around them, the expedition team proceeded rather smoothly. Before long, they arrived deep in the waning forest. Through the trees they could vaguely see a sea and orange-red clouds in the distance. The damage here wasn't too serious. The branches and leaves remained suspended in midair, blocking the frozen dusk, making the environment darken. After carefully circling around the place, the area before Derek's eyes suddenly lit up. He saw two grayish-white, mottled tombstones. Before he could carefully observe them, the rays of dusk that shone through the gaps of the leaves had produced a strange refraction effect at the same time, interweaving themselves into a gigantic figure that was nearly 10 meters tall. This figure was very blurry and contained an everlasting and imperturbable air to it. It was like a reflection from a mythical era. Its skin was grayish-blue, and it wore silver-gray armor that seemed to be stained with blood. Its face was glowing like the setting sun, as though it was a manifestation of its eyes. Just its existence alone had caused the surrounding trees and the void to bend, making everything around it to begin waning uncontrollably. Upon witnessing this scene, a thought surfaced in everyone's mind without any explanation. Giant King, Ancient God Ormer. Goosebumps appeared on the skins of the members of the expedition team, Joshua, Hyam, and Antiona. Bit by bit, the goosebumps emitted grayish-blue colors. At the center of their eyebrows, flesh and blood was squirming, as if a monster was about to bore out. They had collectively been put into the state of being on the verge of losing control. They didn't even see the mythical creature form. Merely approaching the figure had led to signs of losing control as the severity of it increased. Derek Berg was relatively all right because the pure light of the unshadowed crucifix had enveloped him, giving him a warm feeling, allowing him to temporarily withstand the waning effect. At this moment, Colin Iliad had already bent down. He held two swords that were smeared with ointment, and he ran towards that terrifying figure like a hurricane at high speeds. However, this demon hunter didn't charge in a straight line. His footwork was ingenious as he moved left and right,
approaching his enemy in a zigzag-like manner. The gigantic figure that stood in the twilight looked at everything with its sunset-like eyes. It seemed emotionless, like a statue carved out of stone. Suddenly, the glow on its face flashed. It then bent down and heavily pounded its fists on the ground. Boom! The ground shook violently as a fissure opened up. It made Derek and the others lose their balance as they staggered and almost fell. As for Demon Hunter Colin, he had leaped up ahead of time to a height of more than 10 meters, and he cleaved downward with his two swords in a domineering manner. At that moment, the figure that seemed to come from a mythical legend pulled out an illusory sword from the fissure in the ground. The giant sword that seemed like a manifestation of dusk itself was suddenly swung forward. The orange-red storm of light suddenly took form and swept towards Demon Hunter Colin, as well as Derek and company who were right behind him. Wherever the light passed, the trees would wither and the soil would turn to sand. Everything began waning in an irreversible manner as a path was drawn out. Boom! The twilight storm was blocked by invisible walls, causing the forest to shake. At some point in time, Shepherd Elder Lovia had appeared beside Derek. In front of him was a tall and illusory figure covered in silver armor. The figure with a dark red glow near its eyes genuflected and stabbed an illusory great sword into the ground, creating an unusually strong and invisible wall. Bam! At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin's two swords slashed at the nearly 10-meter-tall figure that possessed the aura of an ancient god, sending off countless sparks. The silver-white figure didn't suffer any damage. The silver-gray armor that was covered in blood spots only dimmed a little. With the force of the rebound, Colin once again soared up. He flipped in midair and launched his attack again. In the waning domain, he didn't dare release his mythical creature form, because it was very likely that there was no way of reversing it. Seeing that the phantom that stemmed from a mythical legend had been blocked, Derek hurriedly followed the sudden tremor and heat from the unshadowed crucifix in his palm, and he pressed his finger against a spike. His blood surged into the cross along with the pain. A vigorous and bright light churned out, flying into the air and turning downwards, instantly enveloping the figure in silver-gray armor. His eyes were like a miniature setting sun. In the holy, solemn and pure light, the gigantic and illusory figure stopped moving, as if it had encountered its natural enemy, and the silver-gray armor that was tainted with the light of dusk began to melt. Seizing this opportunity, the evil spirit knight in front of Shepherd Elder Lovia pulled out the illusory great sword from the ground. With several silver rifts that oscillated between disappearing and reappearing, they instantly struck the enemy. Demon Hunter Colin's two swords cleaved downward, as though they were emitting rays of the light of dawn that enveloped the head of the ancient figure. Joshua, Hyam, and the others didn't hesitate to unleash their strongest attacks. After 3 rounds, the illusory figure that seemed to have transmigrated from time had finally begun to crumble, being reduced to burning orange dots of light. When Demon Hunter Colin landed on the ground, he deliberated and said, "That should have been the remnants of the Giant King's will to protect this area. After many years of melding with the environment, it has a certain degree of strength and a form. It's a type of evil spirit. What secrets are hidden here?" Upon hearing the chief's words, everyone cast their gazes forward, towards the place where the terrifying phantom had barred their way. The atmosphere was rather heavy. Fortunately, it was only an evil spirit that was restrained by the unshadowed crucifix. It was just a tiny portion of its remnant will and had almost no strength left. After thousands of years, it's still as terrifying as ever. What would a real ancient god be like? Why would he have such a strong will to protect this? Is it because it's where his parents are buried? As Derek heaved a sigh of relief, he followed the chief and company towards the tomb while being plagued with puzzlement and curiosity. Phew. There's no need for me to do anything. I have to say, this unshadowed crucifix really is very useful in the Giant King's court. It's so good that I'm wondering if it's Adam's goal. Above the grey fog, Klein heaved a sigh of relief and lowered the sea god's scepter that had been raised higher. He then cast his gaze at the place where the Giant King's remnant will had continued protecting for over thousands of years. The first thing he saw was 2 ancient mottled tombstones. On them were the words Father and Mother in Jotun. They contained a mysteriousness that could stir the powers of nature. It allowed one to directly feel the mixed emotions of nostalgia, sadness, pain, and guilt without realizing that they were infected and making them feel depressed. Behind the stone pillar was a grave, but it had already been destroyed, revealing 2 black coffins underneath. It was unknown who had opened the lids of the coffins, as though a confirmation had been made. This made the 2 grayish-white skeletons lying inside become bathed in the light that penetrated through the leaves, dyeing them with an orange-red color that resembled blood. These 2 skeletons had the shape of humans. One was less than 9 meters tall, while the other was less than 8 meters tall. Chapter 11:15. Inside the king's core, one of the 2 humanoid skeletons wasn't more than 9 meters tall, while the other was less than 8 meters tall. It looked ordinary, but it delivered an unimaginable blow to Klein, who was above the gray fog. At that moment, it was as though he had returned to the time when he saw the door of light and the cocoons. Although the emotions he felt were different, the shock was almost identical. This isn't the corpse of a giant. This definitely belongs to a human. The parents of the giant King Ormer were humans? Klein's pupils dilated suddenly, as though they were thirsting to let more light in for him to see it more clearly. However, no matter how he observed or scrutinized the skeletons, he couldn't find any characteristics of giants from the 2 grayish-white skeletons. Their limbs were perfectly proportional, and their bones had 2 eye sockets. They were definitely not underage giants. After a brief moment of silence, Klein lowered his hand with the sea god's scepter once again as thoughts flashed through his mind. Perhaps they're parents that aren't related by blood. Maybe the ancestors of the giants are humans. In the first epoch where chaos and madness reigned, some humans fused with the Beyonder characteristics, mutating into cruel, irrational, and bloodthirsty giants. On the one hand, their descendants inherited their physical happy face. The other hand, they gradually recovered mentally. Hence, they stabilized themselves to become a savage and bloodthirsty race. Among them, giant King Ormer was the first batch of mutants, but he had managed to maintain a certain level of rationality, hence becoming an ancient god. The source of all of this does resemble the origin myths, the original creator? After his thoughts settled into a theory, he began making connections while coming up with more questions. Why does the giant king want to label the waning forest as a forbidden area and not allow any living creatures to enter? He doesn't wish for the fact of humans being the ancestors of giants to be known? But if that's really the case, he could have just cremated his parents' remains. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Moreover, what's with that strong sense of guilt? Who opened the tomb? The ancient sun god who killed the giant king? The god of dawn, Badheil, or the other subsidiary gods of the giant king's court? Also, since the ancestor of giants was human, what about elves, sanguine and other supernatural beings? The ancestors of dragons are actually lizards? In the middle of the second epoch, were there factors regarding their different origins that led to the conflict between the different factions of the quasi-human and the mutants? As Klein didn't have enough clues or information, it was difficult for him to make any judgment or think of any more possibilities. He could only forcefully rein in his thoughts and focus his attention on the City of Silver's expedition team. At this moment, demon hunter Colin led Lovia, Derek, and company to the stone tablet and saw the remains in the tomb. They also fell into an indescribable silence for a long time. Finally, Joshua, who was wearing a scarlet glove, asked hesitantly, "These are the parents of the giant king?" From this City of Silver's Dawn Paladin's point of view, the 2 corpses were indeed not as tall as giants. They were even inferior to him from back when he had just become an adult. If they were identified as young giants, then the proportions and facial features of their bodies didn't match. Joshua's question reverberated in the surroundings, but no one answered. After a few seconds, demon hunter Colin slowly said, "That's why it's a secret." He didn't mention his thoughts or theories. Does this mean that giants are actually a branch of humans, a result of the transformation brought about by Beyonder characteristics? Upon hearing this, the wine-red-haired Antiona said thoughtfully, "The ancestors of the giants are humans?" Derek felt a little dizzy from the shock. He felt that there was a huge gap between the 2. With this thought in mind, he recalled his companions who had lost control, especially those from the giant pathway. He slowly and vaguely believed that it wasn't impossible. Those who lost control usually became abnormally large. Their skin was covered in grayish-blue color, and there was a huge crack in the middle of their brows that sucked in their pair of eyes. Perhaps, demon hunter Colin answered briefly. The members of the City of Silver's expedition team fell silent once again. In this atmosphere, Derek glanced at Shepherd Elder Lovia and realized that this member of the 6-member council had a calm expression. It was neither solemn or confused. At this moment, demon hunter Colin looked around and said, "Split up into groups of 2 to 3 people and search the surrounding areas. Let's see if there's anything to be found."
The members of the expedition team snapped back to their senses and began carefully exploring the area according to the chief's instructions. Unfortunately, this waning forest didn't have anything of value other than trees, tomb tablets, or tombs. Without further delay, Derek exchanged sealed artifacts with Hyam to prevent his Beyonder characteristic from being purged by the unshadowed crucifix. Then, they followed Demon Hunter Colin out of the waning forest, circled around the protruding boulder along the mountain, and found the gigantic cave that was 30 meters tall. Outside the cave, a stone stele had already shattered into pieces and was growing weeds. Under the orange glow of the twilight, there was an indescribable sense of waning death. After entering the cave, the City of Silver's expedition team followed the weathered stone slabs and the peeling murals. They walked between the withered weeds and rough gravel, and they warily explored the area. With every step they took, they would feel that their lifespans were weakening and were becoming dehydrated. After an unknown period of time, the City of Silver's expedition team finally saw a grayish-blue door which was open. On both sides of the door were pieces of iron-black fragments that seemed to belong to some sort of armor. "There should have been guards here," Colin said simply. He took out a bottle of medicine and gulped it down. His light blue eyes were quickly tinged with a layer of dark yellow, and two complex dark green symbols appeared in his pupils. After carefully observing the grayish-blue door for a while, he nodded and walked into the dark hall. All of them passed through the door and came inside. The hall seemed to be held by an invisible hand as it rose up after a loud thud. More than 10 seconds later, the hall stopped moving. Outside the door, a magnificent palace propped up by stone pillars appeared. It looked like the residence of the guards. Derek subconsciously looked around and swept his gaze across the various items in the hall. He saw two murals with ancient characteristics. The main character of a mural was a giant who wore full-body silver armor and emitted an obvious glow. At the location of his eyes, there was a blob condensed from the dawn of light. In the middle of another mural stood a lady dark brown hair. She was a female giant in a long leather skirt. She held a wheat head and fruits and was surrounded by fields ready to be harvested, clear lake waters, fruit-bearing trees, and bright mushrooms. God of Dawn Badhile. Goddess of Harvest Omabella. Derek came to a realization as he nodded slightly. He then retracted his gaze and saw the chief staring at the mural that represented the goddess of harvest. His expression was still as heavy as before. Is the chief hoping that the City of Silver would also have a real harvest? As Derek thought, he followed the orders of Shepherd Elder Lovia, forming a team with the others. They then searched for valuable items and checked if there were any hidden passageways. About 7 to 8 minutes later, they gathered together and followed Chief Colin Iliad into the main door of the hall. Colin Iliad stabbed the two swords into the gap between the stone slabs in front of him. He stretched out his hands and pressed them on both sides of the door. With just a bit of force, it opened its mouth with a heavy rumble. The orange and splendid light of dusk silently shone in, allowing the City of Silver's expedition team to see palaces and the numerous towers that delivered a strong visual impact. The scale, magnificence, and epic feeling of a myth felt more obvious and shocking due to the close proximity between them. Everyone subconsciously held their breaths and forgot about anything else, fully immersing themselves in the scenery. It was the same for Klein above the grey fog. This was the King's Court of the Giants. This was a real divine kingdom. After about 10 seconds, Demon Hunter Colin pulled out his swords and half-turned his body, saying to Shepherd Lovia, "Try checking out the situation on both sides. I can't see what lies ahead too clearly." The two dark green symbols in his eyes slowly dissipated. Lovia acknowledged his order and took 2 steps forward to the door. Outside, there was a platform with staircases on both sides. In front of them stood a railing formed from grayish-white stone pillars that faced the tallest building in the area. There was a huge blue-gray door with countless mysterious symbols carved on both sides of it. It looked extremely dignified. The corridors, stairs, and other objects connected the multitude of palaces and towers together. They were magnificent and brilliant. Lovia's silver-gray hair floated up as the stone that was bathed in the light of dusk protruded out, forming a grayish-white doll. The doll didn't have any spirituality. It was like a strung puppet as it walked to the left. It followed the staircase and walked down one level after another amidst the rich orange light to help the expedition team confirm the situation. Suddenly, its body stopped as fine silver light burst out from within, turning it into countless fragments. Shepherd Lovia wasn't alarmed. She followed the steps from before and created another stone golem, making it head to the right. This time,
The stone golem walked to the end of the staircase and stopped at the entrance of the palace below without anything happening along the way. Demon Hunter Colin watched intently the entire time before saying, "Let's go to the right, but we have to be careful as well." Although he didn't find any danger, the fact that he couldn't discern the actual situation using his Beyonder powers meant that there were many problems. With such a reminder, Derek and company became even more and more tense. The groups of 3 began to slowly walk down as they watched each other's backs. As they walked along the high stairs, Joshua, who was wearing a scarlet glove, suddenly heard a series of tapping sounds coming from behind him. It was as if there was a person following them in silence. And at this moment, Shepherd Elder Lovia was to his side. From the corner of his eye, he could tell that the footsteps were definitely not coming from her. A chill ran down Joshua's spine as he hurriedly said in a deep voice, "There are footsteps behind me." Lovia turned her head and allowed the 5-meter-tall silver knight to appear in front of her. It sized up Joshua's back with its scarlet fiery eyes. After a few seconds of silence, the shepherd elder shook her head. "There's nothing there." Chapter 11:16 Familiar gaze. Lovia's response made Joshua even more wary. He looked at the other members of the expedition team and anxiously asked, "Did any of you hear any abnormal footsteps?" With Thunder God's roar and a broadsword in hand, Derek recalled for a few seconds and shook his head in denial. Hyam, who held the unshadowed crucifix in his hand, looked at the sealed artifact that was still glowing and replied, "Perhaps it's your hallucination?" "No, I heard it very clearly." The scarlet-gloved Joshua frowned and expressed his opinion. Upon hearing this, Demon Hunter Colin, who was walking right in front, half turned around and calmly instructed, "Hyam, Aunt Iona, check on Joshua's condition." "Yes, Your Excellency." Hyam immediately walked to Joshua and pressed the unshadowed crucifix, which appeared to be a manifestation of pure light, against his teammate's forehead. However, this sealed artifact didn't undergo any changes. Immediately following that, the wine-red-haired female warrior, Aunt Iona, came to the side of Joshua and raised her left hand. There was a pale gold bracelet around her wrist. On it were 3 small bells covered in golden scales. The tinkling sounds that sounded calmed Joshua's heart. He was no longer as tense and impatient. "No problem." Aunt Iona cast her gaze towards the chief, Colin Iliad. 2 complex dark green symbols appeared in Colin's eyes. He looked at Joshua for a few seconds before nodding and saying, "It might not be an illusion, but you have to be careful if any abnormalities arise within you." Seeing the chief supporting him, Joshua secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "All right." After the doubts were temporarily put away, the City of Silver's expedition team continued down the staircase that was covered in the glow of sunset, one level after another. Suddenly, everyone heard a groan. From the corner of his eye, Derek Berg saw Joshua raise his hands and strangle his neck. As he was a Dawn Paladin, he had immense strength. Just as he let out a grunt, his hands snapped his neck. With a gloomy and twisted expression, Joshua collapsed, his eyes filled with disbelief. The person who killed him was himself. Although Derek and the others didn't manage to react in time, their years of training and the experience they had gained from exploring the depths of the darkness made them instinctively take up battle positions, wary of any subsequent attacks. Then they heard a muffled grunt. It was from Shepherd Elder Lovia. The facial muscles of the woman with long silver-gray hair tightened as obvious twitching and squirming appeared, as though another face had grown out. She plopped to the ground on the wide staircase as she grimaced with indescribable pain. Her hands moved slowly but uncontrollably as she clenched her neck. Just as Lovia was about to exert her strength, 2 swords that were smeared with silver-gray ointment reached out and pried her palms apart. Demon Hunter Colin, who was already prepared, reacted in time. Lovia's body twitched as she lowered her head even further. Opening her mouth, she spat out pieces of torn flesh and incomplete organs. She took a deep breath, as though she had finally recovered. Then, she propped her elbow on the ground and took a step forward, prostrating herself and swallowing the flesh and blood organs that she had just spat out in a pious and humble manner. Demon Hunter Colin, who had several old scars on his face, quietly watched this scene without stopping her. Finally, Lovia looked up and said with her unfocused gray eyes, "It was degeneration. A form of degeneration that everyone has. Do you have a solution?" Colin asked without any change in his tone. Lovia nodded without hesitation. "Yes." As soon as she finished speaking, she used her right hand to grab her left index finger. With a loud snap, she pulled it out and stuffed the blood and bones into her mouth.
As she chewed, she muttered, "The Lord that created everything. The Lord who reigns behind the curtain of shadows, the degenerate nature of all living things, the honorific name of the true Creator." Derek's eyelids twitched when he heard that. He suddenly felt that something subtle was happening around him. The orange glow became more saturated and closer to the color of blood. Above the gray fog, the fool Klein's expression instantly turned solemn. Although he couldn't see anything through his true vision, he could vaguely sense that there was a gaze cast over from afar, causing it to interfere with his observations, thus weakening his clarity and range. In addition, that gaze gave him a strange sense of familiarity. It's difficult to not be familiar with it. The first half of my life after I transmigrated was to deal with him, his son, his oracle, his wish to descend, the items left behind by him, his crazy ravings, and all sorts of murals related to him. At that moment, Klein was completely certain that the entity who had begun to focus on the City of Silver's expedition team was none other than the true Creator. Frankly speaking, when Lovia began to recite the honorific name of that entity, Klein wanted to directly smite her with lightning storm and eliminate the problem before it appeared. However, he ultimately held back the urge because he wasn't confident that he could finish off the shepherd in one strike. The evil spirit that Lovia had grazed was likely at the level of a sequence 3. Although it had died a long time ago, its current combined strength was still at the level of sequence 4. It likely wasn't a problem for her to withstand lightning storm, which was close to but not at the angel level, for some time. And once the fool couldn't easily kill Lovia, it would be a sign of fear in the eyes of demon hunter Colin. In addition, Klein believed that Colin Iliad was happy to see Shepherd Elder Lovia chant the true Creator's honorific name. He wanted to use this to put the fool in check and achieve some semblance of balance. This was actually an act of disrespect in front of deities, making it very easy to anger those great existences, but there was nothing that Colin Iliad could do. He couldn't simply trust the fool and the true Creator, so he could only try his best by probing them while staying on the edge of a cliff. Only by doing so would the City of Silver not suddenly be destroyed like the cities that had been buried deep in the darkness, covered with the dust of history. What a pity! If the unshadowed crucifix was in my hands now, I'd have the chance to instantly kill that Silver Knight evil spirit by using all my strength to activate the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. It's a fundamental restraint. Klein sighed silently and could only accept this development. He hadn't discovered anything unusual with Joshua until this City of Silver warrior with scarlet gloves strangled himself. Only then did he see his spirit turn dark and gloomy. Just as the Shepherd Elder had said, this was a form of degeneration that he originally had. It was no different from losing himself because of money and beauty, making it very difficult for external forces to detect it. That staircase should have remnant godhood powers that represent degeneration. They're embedded into the environment, making it difficult to discover and resist. Previously, the stone golem had no spirituality, so it wasn't affected. From the honorific name, the true Creator wields control over degeneration. Just his gaze alone is enough to disperse the corresponding powers. Klein adjusted his mental state and continued to observe the subsequent developments. During this process, he couldn't help but consider a question. Was the true Creator like him now, watching the movements of the City of Silver's expedition team in his divine kingdom? On Earth, this is called a fellow viewer watching the same live stream. If I were to send gifts, would the true Creator gift even more? By making this teasing remark, he tried to ease the nervousness and concern that he felt from having the true Creator cast his gaze over. That was a true god. Be it Adam or Amon, they weren't even qualified to be on par with him. At that moment, Shepherd Lovia had already stood up, and her left index finger had also grown back. She looked at Chief Colin Iliad and said, "This region will no longer suffer from degeneration." This meant that the staircase wasn't that dangerous anymore. Normally, the expedition team would ignore Joshua's corpse. Whether they advanced or retreated, they couldn't afford to waste any time. If they stayed in an extremely dangerous area for too long, the other members would have an accident. However, since the 6-member council's elder Lovia used a tone of certainty to indicate that there were no problems nearby, they could rest and deal with it. Derek put down Hyam's broadsword and walked to Joshua's side. After staring for a few seconds, he bent down to pick up his scarlet glove and wore it on his left palm. He still remembered that Joshua was always bragging about the mystical item he had obtained during an expedition. He could also clearly recall that when he left the afternoon town camp, he had said that he would be forced into a marriage after the expedition, with no idea as to who his wife would be. Yet, an hour later, This teammate had turned into a cold corpse. To the people of the City of Silver, this was something that happened frequently. No one cried or broke down. However, there was an emotion that had already seeped into their bones and blood. It was heavy and mixed with grief. They watched as Derek raised his left hand and aimed it at Joshua's corpse. A blazing flame flew out, enveloping the teammate who had been fighting alongside them earlier. After the cremation, Demon Hunter Colin put away the Beyonder characteristic that had seeped out. The rest of the team members grabbed a handful of ashes and placed them into a hidden pocket in their clothes. Amidst the silence, they continued down the stairs and arrived at the bottom of the staircase. There was a towering palace bathed in the glow of dusk. Behind it was a corridor and staircase that led to another area. The palace door was open, and it was pitch black inside. Not a single ray of light could shine inside. Demon Hunter Colin carefully observed for a while before saying, "Just like in the outside world." What he meant was that the group should use various means to maintain a lit environment and not allow themselves to fall into a state of absolute darkness. Hence, Hyam activated the unshadowed crucifix, allowing it to envelop all of his teammates. At the same time, Antiona lit a lantern and held it in her hand, in case the cross suddenly lost its effectiveness. The group entered the palace and walked through the abnormally empty hall. Their footsteps reverberated into the distance, but there weren't any echoing sounds. As he walked, Derek suddenly felt his eyelids grow heavy as he felt a strong sense of sleepiness. At this moment, he heard the chief's low growl. "Don't fall asleep." Derek suddenly woke up, snapping out of his fatigued state of not being able to open his eyes. At that moment, a female warrior's body went limp and fell to the ground, as though she had fallen into a deep slumber. Then, she disappeared into thin air and disappeared in front of everyone. Demon Hunter Colin and Shepherd Lovia exchanged looks for a while before shaking their heads and leading the team forward. During this process, they would hurt themselves from time to time, using pain to stay awake. Finally, they passed through a bunch of arches and saw the darkness that couldn't be dispelled up ahead. With the help of the light from the team, they discovered that it was a hall with countless murals drawn. In the middle of the hall was a long dark red table. Situated around it were high-backed chairs with intricate patterns. Derek felt a baffling sense of familiarity. He immediately came to a realization that this was somewhat similar to the scene at the tarot gathering. Suddenly, balls of light lit up and murmurs sounded around them. Around the hall stood stone pillars that didn't support the dome. Scarlet flames were ignited one after another, illuminating the surroundings in an abnormal manner. The murmurs grew louder, as if they had finally passed through a long and distant space and arrived at their destination. The hall was so lively that it was as if a gathering was held. Around the dark red table, blurry and illusory figures suddenly appeared. A total of 11 figures sat on different high-backed chairs. Chapter 11:17 The strongest organization. As the flames flickered, Derek and company subconsciously looked at the long dark red table. The first thing they noticed was the figure closest to them. The figure wore a simple linen robe, and had a head of long silver hair and indiscernible facial features. It made Colin, Lovia, and Derek find the figure oddly familiar. In an instant, they felt as though a bolt of lightning struck their minds, illuminating their blurry memories. Angel of Fate. Ouroboros. Read more chapters at allnovelful.com. Just as the pupils of the team from the City of Silver dilated, the figure turned around and looked at them. A pair of indifferent eyes immediately occupied their vision as extraordinary mysterious rings appeared. In a daze, Derek saw a figure in front of him. He was a handsome, radiant, and energetic man. He wore a pure white robe and had short golden hair. With his appearance, the surroundings became abnormally bright. The warm feeling was like a ray of light, instantly filling every spot. Derek felt as though he had seen the day, as mentioned in legends, momentarily forgetting where he was or what he was doing. The man took a step forward and his blurry figure overlapped with Derek. Then, Derek sat beside the dark red long table, occupying one of the high-backed chairs. He had become the handsome and radiant man who was attending a secret gathering. At the same time, the grizzled City of Silver chief, Colin, whose face was covered in old scars, encountered the same blurry and illusory figure. The figure was 7 to 8 meters tall. He was wearing silver full-body armor, and his eyes were glowing like the light of dawn. He raised the long sword in his hand, letting it press against Colin Iliad's forehead like a scepter. Demon Hunter Colin struggled for a moment,
but he quickly calmed down when he was enveloped by the orange light. With that, he and the giant in front of him merged into one. He strode towards the dark red table and sat on the second seat on the right. Shepherd Lovia encountered a man in a long black robe. He had black curly hair over his shoulders and a pair of eyes that seemed to be covered in shadows. It was difficult to see his face clearly, but the silver threads, complicated patterns, and gorgeous accessories were directly reflected in her mind. Lovia trembled and couldn't help but lower her head, allowing the layers of black wings on the man's back to wrap around her. She became the man and walked to the end of the dark red table. There were 2 high-backed chairs with complex patterns placed there. Lovia chose the left one. The remaining members of the City of Silver's expedition team also encountered similar situations, but the figures they faced were different. After they found their seats on both sides of the dark red table, the area around the empty high-backed chair at the seat of honor became darker, outlining a female figure that seemed to be shrouded in fog. Right on the heels of that, a voice that seemed to transmigrate from ancient times echoed in the ears of the attendees. We are trying to redeem ourselves and also maintain the balance of this world. Dissociation and deviation are undoubtedly the most basic order. This is also in line with his thoughts. I can't deny that we all have our own sinister thoughts and desires, but this is very normal. Death and spilling blood are inevitable. In the name of Rose redemption, above the gray fog, Klein listened attentively. He couldn't wait to hear more of the contents said by the voice. However, whether it was the scene or the voice, it began to loop. It was as if it had only been fixed at a section lasting less than a minute. This is the scene of the establishment of the Rose redemption? Previously, the Red Angel Evil Spirit said that this was an extremely secretive organization established by a group of corrupted angels. Now, it seems like that isn't the case. The person who said that was probably not Medici, but either Sauron and Einhorn. They actually didn't know much about Rose redemption. Klein mumbled inwardly as he cast his gaze back at the City of Silver team that were repeating the actions like puppets, approaching the table, sitting down, listening and leaving. When the torches around the hall lit up one after another, Klein had already found something unusual with his true vision. He saw the murals on the wall come alive and rapidly expand, overlapping with the hall. It made the table, chairs, and floor tiles that had been cold for thousands of years warm up once again. It made the figures that had once been in this secret meeting cross the borders of time, reviving at their fixed seats, allowing the words from the past to reappear. Many of those figures were familiar to Klein. One of them was the Angel of Fate Ouroboros. This king of angels, who was still a member of the Rose Redemption, was the most lifelike among all the illusory figures. Combined with how the scenes were looping, Klein began to suspect the person who left the murals was Tail Devourer Ouroboros. In the previous temple ruins, there were murals left behind by him. Likewise for the ruins of the Battle of the Gods. In the Giant King's court, there are similar murals and signs of those powers. I wouldn't believe it if anyone were to say it's not him. Just how much does this king of angels like murals? He draws them wherever he goes. Klein couldn't help but lampoon Ouroboros in his mind. The second figure he noticed was sitting beside the Angel of Fate Ouroboros. He was dressed in black armor that seemed to be splashed with blood. He had red hair that resembled fire, looking young and handsome. The reason why he paid attention to this figure was because he had seen it in his dreams. In addition, it was also the most arrogant person among all the figures. Not only did it sit back in its chair, but it also placed its feet on the dark red long table. It didn't mind that the surrounding people were high-level figures of the same status. Red Angel, Medici. These are the kings of angels who participated in the secret gathering? Who else is involved? As Klein's thoughts raced, he decided to first rescue the people from the City of Silver who couldn't exit the looping cycles of fate. He had a lot of experience in this aspect. Yes, the medium to the loop is the hall itself. However, there's no need to attempt to destroy it. As long as it can temporarily break the cycle of fate, the dusk outside will seep in and dispel any abnormalities. They belong to the divine kingdom itself. In terms of status, they can only be stronger or on par with the power left behind by Ouroboros. After observing for a few seconds, Klein quickly came to a conclusion. After flipping a gold coin for a divination, he immediately spread his spirituality towards the crimson star representing the sun. Derek Berg's spirit body immediately tore through the cycle of fate, creating an invisible crack. The orange glow from the light of dusk outside the palace immediately surged into the hall from the window up high. Without waiting for Little Sun to figure out his situation, for fear that the true creator would lock onto him,
Klein didn't hesitate to let him return to the real world. Derek snapped out of his daze and realized that he had unknowingly sat down at the side of the dark red table. He looked up blankly and saw the chief, Elder Lovia, Hyam, Aunt Iona, and the others. He realized that there were still certain traces of confusion on their faces. Thinking back to his experience just now, Derek was alert as he deliberated and said, "The cycle of fate, indeed."
Colin Iliad, who had experienced this before, nodded slightly and stood up. He looked around, and his gaze landed on the largest mural that he had seen lately. The mural depicted the same exact hall. There were similar columns, torches, the dark red table, complicated high-back chairs, and object layout. As for those high-back chairs, there were 11 figures sitting in them. At the very end were 2 seats, and along the table, 5 on the left and 4 on the right. The City of Silver team's eyes also followed the chief's and took in the corresponding scene.
The 5 figures on the left were the beautiful silver-haired man, the red-haired and arrogantly seated man, an elder wearing a hood that exposed only his mouth, winkles, and beard, a dignified middle-aged man dressed in black armor, and a handsome man dressed in white robes. The 4 on the right were a black-robed mummy wrapped in bandages, a middle-aged man with facial features resembling the natives of the southern continent, a giant covered in silver armor, and a supple, beautiful, and dignified lady. The 2 high-back chairs at the very end were a man with dark black curly hair, and a woman shrouded in fog. At that moment, a guardian raised his right hand and pointed at the handsome white-robed man.
His figure is made up of mysterious symbols. These symbols represent white angel, aucuses.
Before the guardian could finish his sentence, he suddenly let out a tragic cry as golden flames spewed out from his body. He instantly became a charred corpse, as if it would be reduced to ashes the moment it was touched.
It made Demon Hunter Colin and Shepherd Lovia incapable of saving him in time. Don't try to distinguish those symbols.
They contain immense power. Colin hurriedly warned the others.
And above the grey fog, Klein was thinking of another matter. White Angel Aucuses. That's the Eternal Blazing Sun's true name?
If not for the fact that the giant king's court itself isolates itself from projected powers, just using Jotun to read this name will attract his attention and incur divine punishment. Amidst his thoughts, Demon Hunter Colin stabbed his swords in front of him, creating an invisible barrier. Then, this City of Silver chief identified the symbols and labels that formed those figures.
He began reading it slowly and firmly from the left. Angel of Fate, Ouroboros. War Angel, Medici.
Wisdom Angel, Haraburgen. At this point, the invisible barrier that was constantly shaking suddenly stopped. This was because this name was no stranger to the people of the City of Silver. This was the true name of the Dragon of Wisdom. Could it be that the Dragon of Wisdom later became the Wisdom Angel next to the Lord? Similar questions arose in everyone's hearts, but Klein discovered something strange. The history of the City of Silver had records of the name Haraburgen. The language they used on a daily basis was Jotun, a language that could mobilize the surrounding forces of nature. This also meant that, in the past 2,000 to 3,000 years, someone in the City of Silver had definitely read or written the name Haraburgen before, but there was no response from the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. The Church of Knowledge and Wisdom still wasn't able to find the forsaken land of the gods. At this moment, Colin Iliad controlled his emotions and continued reading, Wind Angel, Leodoro.
White Angel, Aucuses.
Dark Angel, Sasrar. Evernight Goddess, Ammonizes. God of Combat, Badhile. Earth Mother, Omabella _ God of the Dead, Salinger. God of Spiritual Creatures, Tolsna. Although Klein had expected this, he was still somewhat stunned. The former Rose Redemption was frighteningly powerful. Amongst the 7 deities today, 6 of them were members. There was also Death, the god of spiritual creatures, and 3 kings of angels. This made him recall what the Red Angel Evil Spirit had once said. Rose Redemption has a close relationship with the birth of the true creator. It's impossible for you to imagine that certain people were once members of Rose Redemption, but they've since left it. Chapter 11:18 Klein's Fear in the Past. Rose Redemption could be called the Deity Alliance. But such an organization could only develop itself quietly under the might of the ancient sun god. It had to hide, and secretly scheme in the Palace of Dusk. How powerful was the ancient sun god in the past? Klein couldn't help but let out a breath as he felt deeply poignant. He examined his own tarot club and realized that,
Compared to the Rose Redemption, it was like child's play. Even if he counted the auxiliary members, Willow Septon, Pallas Zoroast, Azek Eggers, and Rionette Tynker, there was no way to compare with the Rose Redemption at its peak. No, even if I compare it with the current watered-down version of Rose Redemption, there's still a huge gap between it and the Tarot Club. After all, its leader and convener is only a sequence 4 saint. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh as he turned his attention to the 11 figures. Based on their images, titles, and true names, I can confirm that the Wind Angel, Wisdom Angel, and White Angel are the current Lord of Storms, the god of knowledge and wisdom, and the eternal blazing Sunday. They really betrayed the ancient sun god, the City of Silver's creator, and they even feasted on the deity they served. The god of combat and Earth Mother are indeed survivors of the Giant King's court. One of them is the eldest son of the Giant King, and the other is his queen. They're mother and son, so that way, the fact that Fainapotter didn't directly declare war on the Lord of Storms to help Faysac makes things a little odd. It requires some thought. Also, the goddess was indeed a former subsidiary god of the annihilation demonic wolf, the goddess of misfortune, Ammonizes. After that ancient god perished, not only did she grasp the authority of the Evernight and successfully ascend to the throne of Sequence Zero, she also single-handedly destroyed all the descendants of Phlegria, sealed the Antigonus family's angel within the nation of the Evernight, and used the Mother of the Sky's body as her vessel for a descent. That's ruthless. Read more chapters at Allnovelful. Calm as a blessed of Evernight, Klein subconsciously raised his head to look around when he thought of this, afraid that his inner thoughts would leak out to the outside world. After entering the foggy town and learning that Antigonus and the Mother of the Sky were the descendants of the ancient god, Phlegria, Klein had a certain idea as to the true identity of the Evernight goddess. After all, in the history of the City of Silver, it clearly stated that the annihilation demonic wolf controlled the authority of the Evernight and had many strange powers. Combined with the Antigonus family's possession of the Seer pathway, and the Mother of the Sky of the Nation of the Night clearly belonging to Evernight, Klein suspected that the annihilation demonic wolf Phlegria was an ancient god that had mixed 2 non-neighboring pathways beyond her characteristics. Therefore, he was extremely crazy and almost irrational. His goal was to destroy and corrupt everything. Hence, he guessed that the Evernight goddess might have something to do with the ancient god, Phlegria. From Grozel's travels, he learned that one of the 2 subsidiary gods of the demonic wolf king had gone missing after he perished, while the other had submitted to the phoenix ancestor. Furthermore, that true name corresponded to death of the 4th epoch, Mr. Azek's father. With that, he could vaguely connect the goddess of misfortune Ammonizes to the Evernight goddess. However, due to his temporary status as a blessed of Evernight, he didn't dare think too much about it. Instead, he focused his attention elsewhere. At this moment, when he saw her real name, he wasn't too shocked. Instead, he felt relieved and felt as though he were on firm ground. In addition, he was even more fearful of the Evernight goddess. Because she didn't want the ancient god, Phlegria, to be revived, the goddess controlled the various matters of the Seer pathway, preventing Beyonders who aren't cleared by her to advance further? That's right, that ecclesiastic in Afternoon Town mentioned who tempted Dark Angel Sasrer, the left hand of God, and the deputy of the Divine Kingdom, but he couldn't say the name, as if it had been erased. Isn't this a demonstration of concealment powers? Other than a place like the Giant King's court, there's no way to say the names, Evernight Goddess and Ammonizes, together. Even if one did, no one would be able to hear it. There are 2 people who convened Rose Redemption. One is Dark Angel Sasrer, and the other is the goddess. Apart from the venue where the ploy was conceived, it's filled with the forces of concealment. In other words, the goddess had single-handedly directed the fall of the ancient sun god, started the cataclysm, and ended the 3rd epoch. Compared to her, be it Adam or Amon, they are still far from her. How could such a true deity be so easily trapped by Adam's arrangements and be unable to interfere with matters of the real world? Although it's not a conspiracy where something the goddess yearns for the most is used, making her willingly walk into a trap, how can the goddess, who wields the powers of concealment and plotted the death of the City of Silver creator, be unprepared? Also, what does "this is also in line with his thoughts" mean? Who does he refer to? After understanding so much hidden history, will I digest the scholar of your potion on the spot once I drink it? With this in mind, Klein raised his right hand and rubbed his temples, forcing himself to focus his thoughts elsewhere. When that ecclesiastic phantom mentioned the 4th king of angels, it self-destructed. Was it because the remaining 3 became true gods?
However, the residents of the City of Silver would occasionally use the names Badheil and Harabergen. So why wasn't there an anomaly?
What is the difference?
The strongest among the kings of angels, the left hand of God, Sasrer. Why did he disappear into the rivers of history? Perhaps he is one of the present-day evil gods, the true creator, the dark side of the universe, or the mother tree of desire. There are remnants of the godhood of degeneracy outside the hall.
Was this left behind by him?
Yes, the birth of the true creator is related to the Rose redemption. How will he react when he sees the murals in this hall? With a thought, Klein cast his gaze at Shepherd Elder Lovia. The lady looked a little lost. She didn't seem to understand the titles and names, but she recognized a portion of them. For example, Angel of Fate Ouroboros. She had become a believer of the true creator in the temple ruins left behind by Ouroboros. Derek also stole a glance at Elder Lovia, but he didn't notice any obvious changes in her emotions. As the son of the Tarot Club, Derek was one of the people present who knew the situation of the outside world the most. Furthermore, he had long known who the kings of angels were. He suspected that 3 of them had later become deities. At this moment, he was the least confused and perplexed. He was only slightly shocked at Rose Redemption's level. This was more exaggerated than he had imagined. It's no wonder the Lord perished. Derek was first enlightened before he felt his heart turn heavy. At this moment, he swept his gaze and saw the chief's face turn pale and ugly. He even muttered a few words softly. This is impossible, impossible. As far as I can remember, the chief has never lost his composure like this.
Did he think of the Lord perishing due to Rose redemption? He can't accept that he will never return?
However, he had long learned of this from me. Just as Derek was feeling puzzled, he discovered that, aside from his tightly pursed lips, the chief's expression had returned to normal. In the minds of the other members of the exploration team, the prophecy they had previously learned in Afternoon Town appeared. Omnipotent Lord, I repent.
Tempted Sasrer. The kings often came to the palace belonging to the dusk to conspire.
It was already too late by the time I discovered all of this. Degeneration, bloodshed, darkness, rot, murders, corruption, and shadows had already drowned this piece of land. A huge calamity will begin here.
Hyam, who was holding the unshadowed crucifix, took a long while to calm his emotions.
He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "This is the place belonging to the dusk. These are the subsidiary gods and kings of angels during the second epoch. They plotted everything, causing a huge calamity to happen. They made the Lord forsake this land?" Colin Iliad pulled out the 2 swords in front of him and half turned around, calmly replying, "Most likely. If we can figure out what exactly happened back then, do we have a chance to please the Lord and let him look at this land again?" Upon hearing the chief's answer, Aunt Iona asked anxiously. At that moment, Derek seemed to see a trace of pity and sadness in the chief's eyes. He heard him acknowledge and say, "Perhaps. Then let's continue exploring."
The other team members pleaded with burning eyes.
This was the closest the City of Silver had gotten to having a glimmer of hope over the past 2,000 to 3,000 years. None of them wished to let it go, even if they had to sacrifice their lives for it. Colin Iliad slowly surveyed the area and said, "Don't forget the principles to uphold during explorations.
Don't act rashly at any time.
Having confirmed that this place is related to redemption, we can always come a second time, a third time, or even more. There's no need to be so impatient." Upon hearing his words, the other members of the exploration team calmed down. They replied one after another, "Yes, Your Excellency." Under the arrangements of Demon Hunter Colin, the remaining members split up into small groups and carefully searched the hall. They didn't discover anything else that was valuable beyond the murals. Read more chapters at allnovelful.com. Of course, it wasn't that there was no such thing. This was, after all, a divine kingdom of an ancient god. What seemed like an ordinary long table, chairs, stone pillars, and torches might have special effects when taken outside. Furthermore, those effects could last for a very long period of time. Alas, it wasn't convenient for the City of Silver's expedition team to bring them around, as they lacked practical value. As for the other murals, they were profiled from different angles of the main murals. When combined, they formed a 3-dimensional scene. After completing the search, Derek and company gathered again and followed the chief to the exit at the back of the hall. There was a gray-blue door with a single pane. With a 10-meter-tall door between the two of them, Colin Iliad carefully observed for a while before finally saying, There's a powerful guard outside. Chapter 11:19 Tacit Cooperation. Upon hearing the chief's words, Shepherd Lovia immediately raised her question. Just like the 2 silver knights at the front gate of the king's court. It won't take the initiative to attack targets outside a certain range? Colin Iliad nodded slightly and said, at least that's how it seems to be at the moment. They were already near the exit, but the guard outside had no reaction. This meant that the other party didn't possess real intelligence or spirituality. It was very likely that they were objects that came to life. Without waiting for the other members to speak, Demon Hunter Colin continued, huge, heavy. After obtaining the corresponding information, the City of Silver's group formed a tacit understanding. A team opened up a distance from the exit, but they faced towards the door. It was protected by Shepherd Elder Lovia. As the bait to attract the guards, a team took the corresponding holy oil from the chief and smeared it across the ground at the exit. Hyam, who held the unshadowed crucifix, and Demon Hunter Colin stood by the side of the door and used the stone columns to hide. Then, Colin Iliad sheathed one of his swords onto his back and took out a small metal bottle, gulping down the liquid inside. His aura rapidly faded away and wasn't obvious anymore. If one didn't look closely, they wouldn't be able to discover his existence. This was another setup. Hyam was in the open, while the demon hunter was hidden. After another 10 seconds, Shepherd Lovia stretched out her right hand and grabbed at thin air. Her silver-gray hair was dyed a deep blue color. The wind howled as the grayish-blue door opened. Right on the heels of that, heavy footsteps could be heard, causing the entire hall to shake. A giant covered in iron-colored armor rushed into the hall with a halberd in hand. Its exposed parts didn't show any flesh or blood, as though they were made of metal. Behind the black mask was a dark red glow. If it didn't move and stood there, it wouldn't be any different from a statue. Tap, tap, tap. The shaking in the hall became more and more obvious. The giant statue suddenly threw out the halberd in its hand, stirring up a hurricane that tore towards Derek and company at the door. Boom! The halberd struck an invisible barrier as the illusory ripples rapidly spread out. In front of Shepherd Lovia, an illusory figure that wore silver armor had appeared at some point in time. It stabbed its great sword into the crack on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. The giant statue didn't stop as it ran into the hall. At that moment, a whistling sound was heard under its feet as its massive body jerked backward. It had stepped on the spot that was smeared with holy oil. As the giant statue fell, the crimson light in its eye suddenly bloomed as an invisible force appeared and held it up. Suddenly, a blinding white light shot out from the unshadowed crucifix, accurately hitting the giant statue's only eye. The dark red color dimmed. Demon Hunter Colin leaped up and held the same sword with both hands, plunging it down like an eagle swooping down at its prey. Dawn appeared as they converged on the straight sword, making it exceptionally huge. It even exceeded Colin Iliad's height. With a poof, the bright sword pierced through the gap in the giant statue's armor, stabbing into its eye. A flood of light from the dawn rushed in. With his hand still gripping the hilt of his sword, Colin Iliad exerted more force. As the giant statue fell to the ground, he pulled out his sword and leaped to the side. The giant statue lay at the door as its body emitted cracking sounds until it finally all movement. Without looking at it again, Colin turned to look outside the door. After a few seconds he said, "There are no other gods for now. We can handle this statue." Derek and company quickly surrounded the giant statue and skillfully searched for materials. Above the gray fog, Klein watched the entire battle from the sidelines and was deeply impressed by the City of Silver's teamwork. According to his observation, it was unknown what metal the giant statue was made of. Its surface was covered with armor that had shocking defensive strength. It could completely ignore most attacks in battle, and it was very difficult to deal with. Furthermore, this giant statue didn't have any spirit. In other words, it was immune to the beyonder powers of the corresponding domain, such as spirit body threads control, hypnotism, frenzy, and nightmare. It was like a walking fortress that made one suspect that it was the work of the goddess of harvest. Klein believed that, if he were in their shoes, with the core powers of a bizarro sorcerer being useless, he could only rely on his 2 marionettes' powers to deal with the giant statue. He had no idea how the battle would develop. The distortion and disorder powers of an Earl of the Fallen might be effective, but I might not be able to finish it as fast as the City of Silver's expedition team. A team of Beyonders with a tacit understanding would be able to produce the effect of 1 + 1 greater than 2. Yes, that chief's confidence in timing, as well as his decisiveness in his attack, was also key. Klein nodded slightly, feeling a sense of admiration. If this were really a live stream, then he might not be able to help but send a gift as a tip. Of course, there was a high chance that it was just a thought. After taking away the most valuable item on the giant statue, the City of Silver's expedition team proceeded forward. They followed the corridor outside and entered another hall. Just like that, they weaved through the layers of palaces, towers, and different corridors, in an attempt to find more clues, as well as the entrance to the sea as described by the outsider Jack. Regardless of whether they believed the boy's words, they couldn't help but look forward to the dark blue sea behind the giant king's court. On the other side of the sea, there were kingdoms where humans flourished. There were no monsters hidden in the darkness. The sun rose and set, and lightning only appeared when it rained. People had all sorts of food there. During this process, the City of Silver's expedition team didn't encounter many enemies. Most of them were statues that had come to life. A small number of them were evil spirits formed by the combination of remnant emotions and the power of dusk. The latter was unable to put up any resistance against the unshadowed crucifix. That's normal. The fool Klein above the gray fog nodded slightly, expressing his acceptance of the current situation. After the giant king perished, this place already belonged to the ancient sun god. It's unlikely that there will be a large number of giant powerhouses and mystical items left behind. When the kings of angels were conspiring, they definitely eliminated any unnecessary troubles ahead of time. Once the ancient sun god was eaten up, the ownership of this place was a mystery. Perhaps it was abandoned. In short, there aren't many foreseeable demigods or items. Well, without the unshadowed crucifix, those evil spirits will be very troublesome. The City of Silver's expedition team might not be able to advance so smoothly, making it impossible for them to advance so far unless an angel leads a team or activates a Grade 0 sealed artifact. When the unshadowed crucifix returned to Derek, the City of Silver's expedition team was already very close to the tallest building in the giant king's court. The dusk here was extremely dense, as though it came from that palace. Once we leave this hole, we should come to the wing of the giant king's residence. Demon Hunter Colin got his bearings and direction before pointing ahead. Shepherd Elder Lovia nodded. Finally, there was some irresistible hope in her expression. Derek's heart beat faster, and he could no longer control his excitement. Then, he was placated by Antiona. After composing themselves, the people from the City of Silver entered the hall in front of them and saw that there were oil paintings hanging on both sides. These oil paintings depicted different giants. Some held bone flutes, some carried wind chimes, while others carried a 7-string guitar that matched their height. As the City of Silver's expedition team arrived, the giants in the oil paintings suddenly came to life. They began playing their instruments, producing a beautiful tune. The light of dusk in the hall lit up a little. More and more food appeared on the long tables around them as they glowed with a tempting glisten, effusing a very tempting fragrance. Roasted chicken. Roasted goose. Fish with honey based. Is this a dinner banquet for the giant king's court? But aren't the sizes of those chickens, geese, goats, and fish too large? The work of the goddess of harvest? With a glance, Klein confirmed that the food that appeared was an illusion. After all, the giant king's court no longer had any ingredients, nor did it possess anyone who could envision or create them. This is normal food? Hyam, who was holding Thunder God's roar, stared straight at one of the long tables. His Adam's apple bobbed. Maybe. Derek sniffed and couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Apart from the black-faced grass, they had never seen normal food. The meat that the monsters roasted was of different colors, but they also tasted equally as bad. It could even poison them. Demon Hunter Colin stared for a few seconds before sighing. They're all fake. Don't come into contact with them, or there might be unnecessary accidents. Other than Lovia, the team from the City of Silver retracted their gaze with great difficulty. They followed the chief all the way to the exit of the hall. After a series of inspections, Colin Iliad inserted his swords into the ground and pushed open the heavy door. A crack appeared as rich orange light shone inside. As the gap grew bigger, the towering palace gradually became clear. Then, the people from the City of Silver heard a crashing sound. At this moment, Colin drew out a sword and suppressed the restlessness in his team members' hearts. He then drew out his other sword and slowly walked out of the hall. Derek and the others followed cautiously.
After completely bathing in the light of dusk, they looked to the left at the same time. There were railings formed from stone pillars. Beyond the railings, there was an orange-red cloud that was gently ebbing at the distance. On the endless swath of dark blue, they emitted crashing sounds. There was no need for anyone to explain. At the same time, the members of the City of Silver's exploration team recalled the records in the book and Jack's description. A term flashed in their minds: the sea. Previous index. Next add bookmarks. Input title/author. Home My Bookshelf Cookies app.
Chapter 11:20 Court Chaser. The dark blue, boundless sea that ebbed gently and seemed to contain infinite life was presented to members of the City of Silver's expedition team. It was no longer a record written down in ancient books, nor was it a combination of words spoken by outsiders. Although it was still very far away, it seemed like contact was possible. The wine-red-haired Aunt Iona watched in a daze. She opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something, but in the end, all she said was the words, "the sea." Just as she finished speaking, a silver crack suddenly appeared on her forehead. The crack shot up rapidly, instantly splitting Aunt Iona into two halves. Warm and bright red blood gushed out, splashing across Derek's face. Without a sound, more silvery white light shot out from her body, splitting her body into countless small pieces of flesh. The reveling face full of hope was like a puzzle that had fallen to the ground, splattering everywhere. It was only at this moment that Demon Hunter Colin reacted. He brandished his two swords and slashed them diagonally outwards, as though he was dealing with invisible enemies. Clang, clang, clang. Silver light flashed, and the sound of metal reverberating echoed. The morning sun around Colin Iliad shattered and scattered in chaos. At this moment, the silver phantom behind Shepherd Lovia had already taken a step forward and stabbed the blurry giant's sword into the ground. Clang, clang, clang. As they surrounded the people of the City of Silver, the streaks of silver light appeared in different spots, trying their best to cut through the invisible barrier around them like insects struggling in amber. Clang, clang, clang. The dense, sometimes thick silver light constantly appeared, causing the defensive powers of the expedition team to tremble, as though it would shatter at any moment. However, be it Demon Hunter Colin, Shepherd Lovia, or Derek, they couldn't find any traces of the enemy. The fool above the grey fog was just about to give a certain reminder when the chief of the six-member council seemed to realize something and crossed his two swords in front of him. Clang! The gigantic silver beam struck the two swords, causing Demon Hunter Colin's feet to sink into a solid stone slab. He took this opportunity and roared, "Unshadowed domain." Upon hearing the chief's reminder, Derek didn't hesitate and stabbed his finger on the thorns of the unshadowed crucifix, doing so without any regard for the pain. As his blood oozed out, clear, bright, pure, and blazing light suddenly exploded, enveloping the entire area between the two buildings. There wasn't a single shadow in this area that could hide. Nothing else could be hidden. Light had become the ruler of this region. A huge figure quickly outlined itself on the side of the giant king's palace. It was wearing silver full-body armor and was nearly 5 meters tall. The flickering light behind the mask was either deep red or orange. And unmistakably, there was a single vertical eye there. This was a giant who was still alive. He didn't wait for the enemy to enter a certain range before attempting to attack, implying that he had sufficient intelligence. Unlike the other silver-armored knights, the giant's bracer had bright patterns on it. On the right was a blood-red color that circled around his arm, and at the same spot on the left, it was adorned with black spots. The giant knight raised his broadsword and pointed at everyone in the City of Silver. He said in a thunderous voice, "How dare you barge into the king's court and disturb Lord Sasrar's slumber?"
Sasrar? Dark Angel Sasrar? The fool Klein above the grey fog was alarmed when he heard that. He subconsciously sat up straight. The former left hand of God, the deputy of the divine kingdom, the leader of the kings of angels, one of the two leaders of Rose Redemption, hadn't disappeared into the river of history. He was sleeping deep in the giant king's court, sleeping in the residence of the giant king? Why did he choose to enter a state of slumber? Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he subconsciously cast his gaze towards the palace that the giant knight was guarding. It was the tallest and most magnificent building in the giant king's court. The dusk's light seemed to transform into something corporeal that covered its surface, dyeing it with a clear sense of decline. It gave off the feeling that the sun had set and an eternal eventide was coming. On both sides were steeples, while on the other side were spires. The front door was a double door that opened outwards, with gray and blue as the main colors. Its height exceeded 10 meters, and it was covered with symbols, labels, and patterns. It looked stately and mysterious. There was a pitch-black socket on the left side of the door at a height of 3 to 4 meters tall. It was equivalent to an adult's fist. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly thought of the dream divination he had done in the past.
Back then, he had seen the same scene, and the medium he had used for the divination was the giant's key he had obtained from Vice Admiral Iceberg.
Is that the key to opening the giant king's residence? As he extended his hand, he tried to use his true vision to pass through the obstruction of the building to see the situation inside the palace. Unfortunately, he failed. The iron-black key, which was the size of a 7-string guitar, landed in front of him. At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin suddenly said before the giant knight attacked, "You're a court chaser?" The giant knight's broadsword didn't cleave down. Instead, he paused for a second and said in a low voice, "After all this time, to think that there's someone who can still remember court chasers. I'm the leader of all the chasers, the light color Merskogen, and I later followed Lord Sasrer. I once hunted powerful dragons, elves, devils, demonic wolves, phoenixes. Today, you are honored to die under my blade." This light color didn't soften his attitude. He hunched his body slightly and held his sword with both hands.
Like a flying meteor, he rushed towards the people from the City of Silver with heavy footsteps at high speeds.
Due to the existence of the unshadowed domain, he could no longer hide his body like before. Just as Colin Iliad, Lovia and company determined that Merskogen's attack would arrive in a second, this giant knight suddenly stopped his silver broadsword midway. Demon Hunter Colin, who wasn't in Lovia's evil spirit's defensive circle, suddenly had a premonition of danger. Without any hesitation, he lunged to the side. Boom!
A silver ray of light suddenly emerged from the spot where he had been standing, destroying everything from within.
This attack was so strange, like it was generated by the void itself. At the same time, there was also a change in Colin Iliad, who had ducked to the ground. His clothes were torn into pieces and cloth by his rapidly expanding muscles. In just a blink of an eye, this demon hunter had turned into a grayish-blue giant with bluish-black lines warped around him. At his forehead was a deep black crack. Every inch of him contained immense power, infinite mystery, and a strange psyche influence. If a Beyonder under Sequence 4 saw this scene, they would definitely suffer from a strong backlash. Their brains might suffer an excruciating pain that would cause them to lose their minds. Even their spirituality would be corrupted. And if they couldn't withstand such an influence, going crazy, losing control, or even sudden death were certain outcomes. This was the incomplete mythical creature form of a demigod. Originally, Colin Iliad didn't dare to release this form due to the influence of the twilight in the giant king's court. But now, he realized that in the unshadowed domain, the feeling of decline had weakened significantly. He then raised the 2 swords that had enlarged in size as well.
With them covered in the light of dawn, he fought fiercely with the light color Merskogen in the domain that was enveloped in light and shadows.
Clang, clang, clang. The 3 swords of the giants clashed and separated from time to time. Although Colin Iliad was at a disadvantage, he still managed to withstand the barrage of attacks from the king's court chaser's leader. From time to time, he would feel a strong sense of danger. Then, without any warning, he would either duck or roll in another direction. And at this moment, silver beams of light would always appear from the inside and outside. Derek had already closed his eyes. Ignoring the loss of blood, he tried his best to maintain the unshadowed domain. Hyam and another Dawn Paladin similarly didn't dare open their eyes. They helped shepherd Elder Lovia and slowly moved the group towards the palace without exiting the protective domain.
If not for the help of the silver-armored knight Evil Spirit, they would have long been diced into small pieces of flesh and blood by the storm of light that swept the area.
That light color Merskogen alone had placed the City of Silver's expedition team into a precarious position, with no chance of counterattacking. As expected of the leader of the King's Court Chasers, this should be the strongest force beneath subsidiary gods, or in other words, angels. Compared to the Demon Hunter, the Silver Knight has several more terrifying Beyonder powers.
Above the grey fog, the fool Klein held the sea god's scepter and carefully observed the battle. He quickly figured out the aspect in which light color Merskogen was powerful in. Firstly, his defensive power can be transformed into a full-body silver armor set. Secondly, it can be used to hide and conceal himself with the light, hiding any malicious intent. Thirdly, the condensed Sword of Dawn isn't something that can be maintained for a short period of time. It can be used as a normal weapon,
sufficiently sharp, and good at cleansing. Fourth, it can create some sort of thin silver-white sword. It has the ability to teleport, and it can bypass most barriers to attack the target directly, and even cause it to erupt from within the target's body. Furthermore, this thin silver-white sword condensed without any warning, making it difficult to predict. This is a saint who's extremely good at fighting head-on.
If it wasn't for the rich experience and strong intuition of the City of Silver's chief, he would have been in danger due to the suppression effect from being of the same pathway when fighting in his mythical creature form.
If it were me, I might have already been killed. Of course, I wouldn't fight head-on with the leader of the king's court chasers. From the current situation, because the evil spirit needs to protect its shepherd, there's no way for it to directly participate in the battle. The City of Silver's expedition team has almost no chance of winning. Yes, they're already slowly retreating. Very rational. If it really doesn't work, perhaps Mr. Fool will have to deliver lightning punishment. However, the true creator should still be watching. My lightning storm might not be able to quickly resolve Muskogen. Klein's thoughts raced when he suddenly thought of a problem. How did Light Color Muskogen, who wasn't an angel, survive since the end of the second epoch? He's neither a demoness, vampire, nor undying. And from him possessing reason, as well as the ability he displays in battle, he doesn't have beyonder characteristics of other pathways mixed in him. Chapter 11:21 Weakness. Since Light Color Muskogen didn't gain his long lifespan from his beyonder characteristic, Klein could only begin considering external factors. The effects of a mystical item? No, he doesn't have any mystical items on him. Aside from the Giant King's residence, there's nothing in the vicinity either. However, that's the sleeping ground of Dark Angel Sasra. Furthermore, the key is with me. I don't think Muskogen would dare or have the means to enter. Who took the key to the Giant King's residence after Sasra fell into a slumber? Isn't that a bit too wicked? Of course, the palace without the powers of a deity augmenting it wouldn't be able to trap a king of angels. Or perhaps, this key had long been transported to the northern continent during the migration of the giants. Sasra chose to sleep in the palace because, other than a small number of existences, no one can open the door and affect his sleep?
Was Vice Admiral Iceberg's key given to me through a roundabout manner by the god of knowledge and wisdom?
He wants to learn of Sasra's present state? If it's not the effects of a mystical item, what could it be? Time given by an angel from the Marauder pathway? Ignoring the possibility of giving stolen illusory items to someone else, there needs to be an angel or a Grade 0 sealed artifact from the Marauder pathway. And there aren't any similar existences nearby. Back then, Muskogen was given a lifespan of thousands of years at once? Perhaps only Amon is capable of doing that. Clearly he wouldn't help Dark Angel Sasra. In addition, this blasphemer's true body seems to be wandering around the forsaken land of the gods. If there were angels or Grade 0 sealed artifacts of the Marauder pathway here, they might have become his food long ago. The cycle of fate? After Light Color Muskogen's natural death, everything begins with him guarding Sasra again? Yes, that's possible. If the current Muskogen is in an aged state, then it's completely understandable how so much time has passed. Furthermore, because the time in this loop seals centuries, it hasn't reached a node yet. It's only normal that I didn't manage to discover any signs above the gray fog in my haste. With this in mind, he quickly observed his surroundings to find traces of the Angel of Fate, Ouroboros. However, there was no remnant power like that. Klein quickly retracted his gaze and continued to observe Light Color Muskogen's intense battle with Colin Iliad and the silver-armored knight Evil Spirit. His spirit body threads are normal, eliminating the possibility of him already becoming a marionette. Under true vision, his condition isn't abnormal. This means that he isn't a figure summoned from history. The divine kingdom of the Giant King's court is slowing down the passing of time or aging. The former can be eliminated because my spirituality is almost unable to support my level of observation. This matches the amount of time the City of Silver's exploration team has spent in this area. There is a certain chance of the latter, with life progressing in the sunset state but being solidified during dusk. But the problem is that the ancient god, the Giant King, has already perished. Badheil, who wields the power of dawn and the power of dusk, has brought the divine kingdom to the astral world. It's impossible for this king's court to still have such a powerful influence remaining within it. Klein went through all the possibilities of extending one's life that he could think of, but none of them matched the situation of the leader of the court chasers. He had no choice but to consider another possibility. A secret art with a huge defect? This should be dependent on some kind of power in the giant king's court. Otherwise, the range of Merskogen's activities wouldn't be so tiny. It wouldn't take until the City of Silver's expedition team arrived at Carrot Residence before he took action. The entity related to life inside the giant king's court clearly exists, the former goddess of harvest, the present Earth Mother, giant Queen Omabella. As this thought flashed through his mind, he cast his gaze at the giant statues outside the palace. They were no different from the ones the City of Silver expedition team had encountered along the way. They were only slightly larger. However, after careful inspection, he noticed a small number of abnormalities. These giant statues had the aura of life, and they possessed a certain amount of spirituality. However, behind the mask, it was pitch black without any dark red glow. This light color Merskogen had used some sort of secret technique in the life domain to bind his spirit with the living statues. Using them, he obtained a long life, but this results in him being limited to such a tiny region and being unable to leave. This is very similar to the way evil spirits exist. This way, Merskogen might not be able to show his normal mythical creature form. Klein conjured a gold coin and flipped it up to make confirmation. When he received an affirmation, he raised the sea god's scepter high and prepared to remind Little Sun through the prayer light. At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin, who had avoided Merskogen's first attack, suddenly ducked and circled around him, running straight for the giant king's residence from the side. His gaze was locked onto those gigantic statues. In the intense battle just now, although this City of Silver chief had always been at a disadvantage, he didn't give up on observing his surroundings, nor did he stop thinking. He was similarly puzzled as to why the leader of the court chasers could live for thousands of years. When he discovered that the living giant statues were only standing outside the palace without participating in the battle, he had arrived at a certain conclusion. He didn't know what exactly was going on, what principles underlay it, or what domain it belonged to, but his rich experience in exploration, and the intuition as a demon hunter, made him believe that the statues were the crux of the problem. Tap, tap, tap. With two swords in his hands, Colin Iliad dashed forward, taking large strides. However, he didn't run in a straight line as he zigzagged his way forward. Upon seeing this scene, Light Color Merskogen let out an angry roar as he held the broadsword in his hands and rapidly slashed forward. His reaction proved that Colin Iliad's judgment was correct. Bang, bang, bang. Demon Hunter Colin suddenly leaped away and did a roll. And above his original trajectory, silver light appeared out of thin air and exploded, forming a long snake. It completely lifted the solid ground of the king's court, tearing open a deep chasm. With a loud thud, Light Color Merskogen took a step forward. His nearly 5-meter-tall body bent and smashed the silver broadsword in his hand onto the ground. Clang! The area shook violently as the pillars snapped and fell into the orange cloud beneath. The ground between the two buildings exploded layer by layer, sending countless gravel flying. As for Demon Hunter Colin, he had already leaped up ahead of time and was in midair. He crossed his swords, creating an invisible barrier that blocked the rubble that resembled an arrow. At this moment, Merskogen, who had his back bent his knee and exerted strength into it. His massive body shot out like a meteor, instantly closing the distance between him and Demon Hunter Colin. During this process, the silver broadsword in his hands moved upwards. Seeing that Demon Hunter Colin was no longer able to dodge, a bright light suddenly shot over, accurately hitting Merskogen's broadsword. With a loud clang, Colin Iliad tumbled to the ground and finally approached the giant statues in one swift move. At the same time, he saw from the corner of his eye that the silver-armored knight phantom in front of Elder Lovia had long drawn out its giant sword. It had condensed the light of dawn into a huge bow as it shot out arrows consecutively. Light Color Merskogen's single eye had already been dyed with a layer of red. He didn't care about the arrows of light, and he allowed them to hit his body as they produced clanking sounds. He kept charging forward and brandished his broadsword, causing silver light to appear from different parts of the void. He chased after the giant-like Demon Hunter Colin, preventing him from attacking those giant statues. Suddenly, an arrow that was gathered from the lustrous brilliances tore past Merskogen and silently hit the gap in his visor. This was from the evil spirit that Shepherd Lovia grazed. Demon Hunter Colin was merely bait. It was the real attacker. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. One arrow after another flew past, but this time, they were all blocked by Merskogen. But at that moment, the demon hunter had already positioned himself well.
He aimed at the remaining giant statues and swung his two straight swords that were enveloped by the light of dawn. Light bloomed as a hurricane of light blanketed the area. With continuous cracking sounds, the statues collapsed to the ground. Meanwhile, the aura of the light color Muskogan rapidly declined. This King's Court chaser leader immediately roared, "Let's die together." The silver broadsword in his hand exploded, splintering into countless fragments of light. They formed a terrifying storm that swept everything around them. The silver-armored knight Evil Spirit and demon hunter Collins simultaneously stabbed their swords into the ground, creating an invisible barrier. The dazzling white light swept between the two buildings, destroying the grayish-blue door and stone pillars behind Derek and company. However, when they swept into the giant king's residence, they failed to affect it completely. After an unknown period of time, just as Derek thought that the invisible barrier was about to be torn apart by the hurricane of light, the rays of light finally dimmed. In the ruins, the silver armor on the body of light-color Muskogan slowly faded away, revealing his grayish-blue body that was wearing linen clothes. Not far away from him, demon hunter Collins' body was covered in blood. He was transforming from a giant back to his normal state, but his aura was relatively stable. It was just that he had weakened greatly. With a clang, Muskogan genuflected as his flesh rapidly aged, decomposed, and evaporated. Under the orange light, he seemed to see the lively King's Court once again. In the frozen dusk, giants came and went, playing the seven-string guitar or bone flute, wrestling, or enjoying the delicacies that they could eat at any time. The passing of their lives moved extremely slowly, and their king sat on a high throne, watching everything from above with a stately demeanor. After that incident, none of that existed, so he chose to follow Dark Angel Sasra. A smile appeared on Muskogan's face as he opened his mouth and softly shouted, "King." This court chaser bowed his head, his flesh and blood completely evaporated, leaving behind a huge white skeleton and silvery white light that had condensed together. Chapter 11:22 The Instructions of the Fool Above the Grey Fog. When Klein saw light-color Muskogan rapidly age and decompose into bones, he suddenly recalled Mobit, Ciatas, Frunzier, and Snowman when they left Grozel's travels. He didn't have the time to stop it back then, and it was no different this time. This was because the leader of the King's Court Chasers had never chanted the honorific name of the Fool, so he was unable to pull him above the grey fog. However, compared to before with the sea god's scepter in hand, he could now do more things by using the prayer light. He immediately accommodated the Black Emperor card and activated the powers of the mysterious space above the grey fog. He made the paper angel carry his own words and used the Crimson Star to enter the real world and land on the remnant spirit of light-color Muskogan. This was one of the methods that wouldn't lower his loftiness as the Fool. After all, the true creator was still watching the area. As Muskogan's consciousness was rapidly wiped out of existence, an angel with black wings suddenly appeared in front of him. The speed at which his spirit body collapsed slowed down as he heard a loud and majestic voice. "What is the advancement ritual and supplementary ingredients of the Silver Night Potion? Is Sasra really sleeping in the palace of the Giant King?" Muskogan replied blankly. "The advancement ritual of the Silver Night comes from the blasphemy slate. It needs a complicated altar to be set up, placing the remains of the 6 powerful creatures one had hunted in the correct positions, and receive the blessings of a deity. The supplementary ingredients are... I can't be certain." In short, that door didn't open after Lord Sasra entered. Amidst the response, the spirit of Muskogan's spirit slowly but firmly dissipated. Finally, he could no longer hold on as he was reduced to points of light that merged into the still dusk of the Giant King's court. And this conversation happened within the soul domain, so no one else could hear it. Thankfully, I'm careful enough to not let Muskogan say the main ingredient of the Silver Night Potion. Anyway, the Beyonder characteristic can be used to replace whatever it is. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to hear the answer to the second question. The Fool heaved a sigh of relief and praised himself inwardly. He then focused and seriously thought about what Muskogan had just said. A deity's blessing? Isn't this advancement ritual a little too difficult? It's only sequence 3. I have to consider the circumstances of his timeline. Muskogan is a powerhouse who survived from the second epoch. It was a habit to call an angel a subsidiary god, and include them in the ranks of a god. That also means that the blessings of an angel should be sufficient. Yes, I'll use divination to confirm this later. Of course, even if an angel's blessings are sufficient, I'm unable to do anything for the time being. It will depend if the Grade 0 sealed artifacts in the City of Silver have any living characteristics that can also be communicated with. The act of setting up that altar is actually a little complicated. Must the remains of the 6 powerful creatures that one has personally killed have to be at the demigod level? It's very difficult for demon hunters outside the forsaken land of the gods. How can there be so many demigod-level creatures to be killed? Most of them are protected by their corresponding organizations. From the looks of it, the Church of the God of Combat should have a new substitute method while maintaining the essence of the ritual. Is this the difference between the first and second blasphemy slate? However, for a young chief like the City of Silver, he must have killed more than 6 powerful monsters. That's easy. As he was currently certain that the second blasphemy slate had appeared after the ancient sun god's death, he was able to determine that light color Murskogen was referring to the first blasphemy slate. He quickly conjured a piece of parchment from his interpretation of the advancement ritual and supplementary ingredients. Then, a divination with a topaz spirit pendulum was performed, to which he received a revelation that there were no mistakes. Then, he threw this message to the crimson star representing the sun. This is a gift from Mr. Fool. After doing all of this, Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. He increasingly felt that the answer to the second question was worth ruminating. He didn't say if Sasra was truly asleep. He only said that the door hadn't opened after the Dark Angel entered. And the only thing that didn't open was the door. The God of Knowledge and Wisdom gave me the key, and Adam gave me the unshadowed crucifix. Was it done to open the door to confirm the Dark Angel's condition? As his thoughts raced, he suddenly felt lucky. Fortunately, the true creator wasn't too interested in this. If this entity had sent down his will just now and tried to influence Murskogen's dissipating spirit, he would have clashed with the Fool's Paper Angel on the spot. That would be rather awkward. Only at that moment did Derek dare to open his eyes. His face was pale from having lost too much blood. In order to maintain the unshadowed domain, he had allowed the cross to absorb quite a bit of his blood. He looked around and placed the unshadowed crucifix in front of him as he sincerely thanked Mr. Fool. At that moment, Hyam put away Thunder God's roar and his weapon. He removed the leather bag on his back and found a set of clothes to throw to the chief. To the City of Silver's exploration team, as long as they weren't wearing clothes and armor that were mystical items, it was inevitable that their clothes would suffer damage during battle. Therefore, they definitely prepared a few additional sets ahead of time. To them, the purpose of clothing covering their bodies was secondary. The most important thing was to leave space to store materials, ointments, and charms. Colin Iliad looked around vigilantly, but he didn't find anything unusual. He quickly put on his clothes and found one of the small metal bottles that had fallen all over the ground during the battle. He removed the lid and gulped it down. His face turned a little green as if he had been poisoned. However, his wounds and the signs of decline were improving. As for Lovia, she was no longer able to maintain the grazing of the silver-armored knight, and she placed it back inside her body. By the time Murskogen's beyonder characteristic condensed into a silvery white luster that resembled a miniature sun or heart, it was put away by demon hunter Cullen. This shepherd elder looked at the nearby palace with his grey eyes and said, "Chief, the path to the sea might very well be hidden there." Lovia paused for a moment before adding, "Perhaps there's another way to get to the other side of the sea." As Colin Iliad watched Derek, Hyam, and the others clean up the battlefield, pick up items, and deal with the mutilated corpse of Antiona, he shook his head and said, "The Dark Angel is sleeping inside, and he is definitely a king of angels, one we are currently unable to resist. Even facing him will be very difficult. Let's head back first and inform everyone that we have seen the sea before making preparations for entry into the Giant King's palace." Lovia's silver-gray hair fluttered slightly as she wore a solemn expression. "But we don't know anything. We can't make any targeted preparations." After saying that, she fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, "I have a suggestion. You, Derek, Hyam, and the others can head back first. I'll stay behind and attempt to enter the palace to gather useful information. I can fuse into the shadows and perhaps not disturb that Dark Angel. If I don't return, it means that the danger inside has exceeded the limits we can handle." When Lovia mentioned that she might die, her expression didn't change at all, as if she had long been prepared. Colin listened quietly and stared at her for a few seconds. "No, we can't bear such risks. If you awaken the Dark Angel, he might leave the Giant King's court and attack the City of Silver, but we definitely won't be able to resist against him." Without waiting for Lovia's reply, Colin Iliad turned his head and looked at the other 3 members. "Derek, what's your opinion?"
My opinion? Derek was somewhat at a loss. He nearly blurted the question back out. Hyam and the other Dawn Paladin were equally shocked. This was because this was an internal conflict among the 6-member council. Colin Iliad had actually asked for Derek Berg's opinion. Could it be that the chief has been nurturing Derek as the next elder of the 6-member council? The 2 members of the expedition team looked thoughtfully at their teammates. This is him asking for my opinion? The fool Klein above the grey fog frowned slightly. His brain immediately began to churn rapidly. What views can I have? If they were to open the door and awaken Sasra, I wouldn't be able to save any of them. All I can do is get them to ask for the help of the true creator. Let's wait until I figure out the situation regarding the Dark Angel from the Red Angel Evil Spirit and other related existences before beginning the exploration. I don't have to worry about the Dragon of Wisdom and Adam's thoughts for now. No matter what, there's nothing wrong with choosing to be calm and cautious at such times. As his thoughts raced, Klein sternly said, "Return." He then projected this image into the crimson star representing the sun. Derek was stunned for 2 seconds before calmly answering the chief's question. I think we should give up for now and wait until we're ready. Colin Iliad nodded and said to Shepherd Lovia, "This is my decision." Lovia fell silent for a moment before saying, "I will defer to your decision." She didn't say anything else as she helped Derek and company mark the area. As Aunt Iona wasn't killed by a blood relative, there was a high possibility that an anomaly would happen. Therefore, the expedition team would mark the area, making the ones who arrived later to be more vigilant. However, they didn't need to worry about such effects since they were very far away from the City of Silver. While they busied themselves, Lovia suddenly looked up and said to Derek and Hyam, "This is the Giant King's court. There might not be any anomalies." She didn't explain as she looked at Antiona's pile of flesh that had been burned into ashes by the flames. She grabbed a handful of them and placed them inside her leather bag. After completing these matters, the City of Silver's expedition team found another passageway, but they obtained a disappointing outcome. Following that, under the lead of Chief Colin Iliad, they retraced their path back. After entering the palace that had already lost its main door while having the oil painting band playing their tunes, Derek couldn't help but turn his head to look outside at the broken railings again. He looked at the orange-red cloud in the distance, towards the deep blue sea. After staring at it for a few seconds, he retracted his gaze and realized that the chief's light blue eyes were also silently looking in that direction. Colin immediately turned his head and said calmly, "Let's go." Then, without turning back, he proceeded steadily. Chapter 11:23. After the expedition above the grey fog, when he saw that the City of Silver's exploration team had begun embarking on their way back as the Giant King's palace remained unchanged, Klein heaved a sigh of relief and leaned back in his chair, exhausted. After 2 hours of observation, his spirituality was nearing its limits. At most, he could hold out for another 15 minutes. Regardless, the things obtained from this expedition completely exceeded my imagination. It's only right to give the Silver Knight potion formula to the City of Silver. As he rubbed his forehead, his thoughts began to wander. Being aware of these ancient secrets is very helpful to my digestion after my advancement. The problem now is that my Bizarro Sorcerer potion hasn't been fully digested. From the feedback I've been getting over this period of time, it can be seen that all sorts of strange tales are indeed useful. When Miss Magician completes the script and publishes it, it just needs some time to build up some momentum before it's done. However, she started writing a few days ago. I don't know when she will finish her manuscript. Why can't she just write a few more hours every day? When I went to pick her up this time, I should urge her. With this in mind, Klein suddenly recalled something. He hadn't given Anderson a reward for finding Vice Admiral Ailment. I'll wait until he helps Danitz become a conspirer. Anyway, this was also part of the agreement. The advancement ritual of an iron-blooded knight isn't difficult, but it's not simple either. Especially for a hunter, it's even more troublesome. It requires a hunter who is adept at provocation and enjoys coming up with ploys to build a team of at least 30 people, and also nurture a deep sense of friendship amongst them while making them strong. When they act almost as one, they'll set up the ritual. The greater the strength and camaraderie amongst the team, the better the effects of the ritual. Seeing that the City of Silver's expedition team was returning in an orderly manner without encountering any accidents, he finally felt at ease. He left the world above the grey fog and threw himself into bed, falling into a dream. After some rest at the afternoon town camp,
Derek Berg finally recovered and his face was no longer as pale. He had just eaten bread made from black-faced grass powder when a figure grew out from the shadows outside and said in a low voice, "Derek, the chief is looking for you."
Yes.
Derek subconsciously stood up.
Thank you.
He was originally prepared to find the chief and hand over the Silver Night potion formula. After watching the messenger retreat into the shadows, he walked out of the room and arrived at the clearing where the bonfire was illuminated. At a glance, Derek saw many members who hadn't participated in the expedition gathered in groups of 2 or 3. They were excitedly discussing something. They already knew that one could see the sea from the Giant King's court. They knew that it wasn't too far from the coast, and as long as they found the correct path, they would arrive there in no time. This was an important step for the City of Silver to save themselves after discovering the outsider, Jack. The residents of the City of Silver, who mainly had the power of dawn, finally saw the light of dawn. Their long wait and persistence seemed to have paid off. Derek could understand the feelings of his team members because he was the same. However, from the world Gammon Sparrow, he knew very well that the waters in the ruins of the Battle of Gods weren't that simple. To head to the other side of the sea would probably be extremely difficult. Ignoring everything else, just Dark Angel Sasrer, who was sleeping in the Giant King's palace and blocking the vital path outside, was a problem that he couldn't overcome at the moment.
I can only hope that Mr. Fool will bless me.
Yes, for that boy to appear in the temple ruins, it means that there are other paths that can bypass the Giant King's palace and reach the sea. Derek thought optimistically as he circled around the quietly burning bonfire and walked towards the chief's room on the other side.
Suddenly, he saw a person sitting silently in the shadow of a boulder. It was a man in his 20s, and he was much taller than Derek.
He held a pale gold bracelet with 3 small bells hanging on it as he looked at it with his pupils unfocused. Derek was no stranger to this man. He knew that he was the husband of Antiona, Dolores, a Sequence 6 Dawn Paladin. In the City of Silver, before the age of 18, one could date freely until they were married. And if one didn't have a partner at the age of 18, they would be arranged to have one. It was the same for widows and widowers after 3 years. This was a necessary measure to ensure the necessary population level for the City of Silver's continuation. It seemed like it was against human rights, but for the continuation of the entire city in the Dark Lands, it could only be done this way. Furthermore, this could ensure that everyone had a certain number of close relatives, preventing the possibility of mutating into a terrifying evil spirit after their death. As for Dolores and Antiona, they were neighbors who lived on the same street. They had known each other since they were young and had a good impression of each other. In the end, they started dating when they were teammates of a patrol team. Over time, they became husband and wife and had a deep, loving relationship. In light of how they had a young child, Colin Iliad had deliberately left one of them behind during the expedition to the Giant King's court. On the one hand, Derek felt that there was nothing wrong with the chief's arrangement, and on the other hand, he felt a strong sense of sorrow because of the way Dolores acted. It was as if he had returned to the state when he had to personally stab his parents to death. From the beginning to the end of the expedition, it only took half a day's time. However, to Dolores, it meant everything had changed. After a moment of silence, Derek retracted his gaze and continued forward, subconsciously taking a few heavy steps. At the same time, he thought of a rumor. Shepherd Elder Lovia once had a husband, but he died in an expedition. This was very common to begin with and wasn't worth discussing. However, other than Lovia, the team that explored the ruins of the temple had all gone mad. After they were eradicated, there were rumors that gradually spread among the residents of the City of Silver. During that expedition, Elder Lovia had eaten her husband. In the night with low lightning frequency, the winds were rather cold. Derek shivered and turned his attention back to the scene before him. He took a few steps and arrived at his destination. He raised his hand and knocked on the chief's door. "Come in," Colin Iliad said calmly. Derek pushed open the door and entered. He saw the chief wearing a linen shirt and dark-colored coat wiping his 2 swords with oil. Colin Iliad didn't stop. He raised his head and looked at Derek. "What are your thoughts on this expedition? What's the chief's motive for asking this?" Having been influenced by Alger, Derek subconsciously had this thought. Unable to grasp the true intentions of the chief, he had no choice but to close the door and answer frankly, there might be other paths to the seaside. The palace of the Giant King should be very important, but that's too dangerous. We need more information. Colin Iliad nodded and asked, "The kings of angels and other existences who call themselves deities secretly plotted together because they wanted to resist the Lord?" And their success caused this land to be forsaken? Although Derek had never directly heard of such an inference, it wasn't difficult to come up with a similar conclusion based on the various secrets he had learned from the Tarot Club.
Yes, that should be the case.
Colin fell silent.
Even his act of wiping his sword slowed down. After a few seconds, he put down the items in his hand and took 2 steps forward. Those who participated in the conspiracy are still active on the other side of the sea? After a moment of silence, Derek replied in deliberation, mostly.
But not too much.
Colin Iliad nodded, indicating that he had nothing else to ask. Derek hurriedly said, Chief, I obtained the incomplete formula of the Silver Night potion, including the supplementary ingredients and the advancement ritual during Light Color Muskogen's death. When he said this, Derek knew that his lie sounded overly fake. It could be seen through right away because he didn't even dare to open his eyes back then. However, he just couldn't think of a better excuse. If Mr. Hanged Man were here, he would definitely have a better solution. Just as this thought came to his mind, he heard the chief speak slowly. Very good.
What is it?
Derek was stunned for a second before he hurriedly recounted the corresponding ritual and supplementary ingredients. Colin listened quietly and let out a long sigh. You have contributed greatly this time. This is extremely important to the City of Silver. In the future, our limit will be Sequence 3 and not Sequence 4. Up to a certain range, the risk of the expedition teams will be greatly reduced. Why will the risk encountered by the expedition teams be reduced when the upper limit is Sequence 3 within a certain range? As Derek was happy that he had made such a contribution, he couldn't understand the chief's words. However, he knew that this was something he didn't have the right to understand. He planned on asking around at the tarot gathering later. He then bade farewell and opened the door. Derek! Colin Iliad suddenly called out to him. Derek turned his head in puzzlement and found that the chief's expression was rather solemn. Colin fell silent for a while before shaking his head. Be careful of Lovia. Yes, Your Excellency, Derek replied from the bottom of his heart. Backlund. Northborough. Hazel took a carriage back to the city from Moose Manor, and she was preparing to meet Miss Audrey at the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation to discuss matters regarding donations and help. After many interactions, she had a very good impression of this noble lady. She didn't feel pressured when beside her, and the strange emotions accumulated in her heart had mostly dissipated. She gradually recovered more of her forgotten memories. I should have a teacher. What exactly happened that day? Every time I think about it, I tremble all over. Hazel cast her gaze out the window, feeling a little depressed. Her carriage was driving past the vicinity of Backlund Street. At this moment, a person dressed in the clothes of a mailman rode his bicycle horizontally across the carriage, looking rather relaxed. Hazel casually sized him up and saw a monocle on his right eye. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.